Hello, and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, the critical thinker at large. Hey, everybody. This is our 300th episode of the Sensibly Speaking podcast. And years ago, when I first had the idea of starting a podcast with, if you recall, my friend Ruth, we really just had the idea of putting a show together to comment on the news and maybe talk about, things from an atheist point of view or something. And it was a very different idea than what this ended up turning into. As you recall, if you have been following me from the beginning, Ruth and I did a number of shows together and then parted ways very amicably. She's still one of my best friends here in Denver. And I proceeded with the Sensibly Speaking Podcast 2.0, where I decided that I would not speak about topical news, of the week kind of things on an ongoing basis because of the fact that the news cycle is way too short and way too misinformed for us to be speaking factually and accurately about current events. Until, weeks or even months have gone by, we don't really understand exactly what's happened in terms of many of the major media reporting that happens, the incidents that are reported on. We don't really fully understand why they occurred, what happened. So I decided, well, from a critical thinking perspective, it's not very good critical thinking to be commenting on something when you don't even know anything about it, or hardly anything but a headline. Of course, this has never stopped anybody across all of the social media platforms from engaging in arguments and character assassination and insults and everything else based on hasty generalizations and conclusions we make about that stuff. But that's more of the critical thinking side of life. And what I wanted to do today in introing this 300th episode of the podcast is merely say that it has been quite a journey for me doing this podcast. And I have often wondered at my how well I might be doing at towing the line between, talking about or interviewing people about destructive cults or extremist situations or totalitarian sects and groups or even, especially when this moves over into the political arena or very, very touchy areas of social values and social justice. There's a lot of conflicting, wild ideas out there, and it is very, very difficult to try to navigate that tumultuous ocean and maintain calm and maintain some degree of critical thinking and maintain some degree of accuracy. And that has really been a struggle for me. And in the last year, as I've been doing a master's program and getting my head very much into an academic kind of headspace, it has been even more challenging because my past cult history in Scientology has left me scarred, and I react to things. And you'll see in today's interview that I do react to the things that are said to me. And I'm not an objective observer, and I've never claimed to be. But I really do try my best to try to, toe that middle line as best I can. But I feel that I err quite often on the side of emotional reactivity and I get quite riled up sometimes. The injustices of the world, and especially of authoritarian, cults, generally make me very mad. And it is sometimes very, very hard for me to restrain myself in that regard. So any errors or, sort of reactions you might see in today's interview or otherwise, I will own that, and that is simply me and my character and me doing the best I can to try to get this information to you guys and still be kind of human in the process. So I thought that today's interview is quite extensive, and Hanna Proser, the woman that I interview, has quite a story. It is very impactful. The claims that she makes are very strong, and I hope that this is viewed in the light that it is presented, which is one of education, not sensationalization. I am trying to do the work that I am doing because I want people to understand just how bad it can get out there, and with belief sets and dogmas and authoritarian structures, whether that is a small Mennonite group, whether that is the Church of Scientology, whether that is Nexium or Enron or a martial arts dojo or whatever the group situation is, these things that we do to each other are pretty horrible. And I think we really need to stop. And the only way that I know how to get that to happen is to try to educate as broadly as I can with the little voice that I have on the little channel that I have here, to do my best to try to get the word out to people such as yourself who's listening or watching right now, that this happens, that this is real, that this kind of abuse happens every day behind closed doors, and we need to get it out into the sunlight, and we need to expose it for what it is, because it is simply evil. So, that all being said, the names today in the interview that I am doing with Hanna of her family and past associates and people that she talks about are all made up. She is not using the real names of the real people that are involved. We refer to their relationship, but we do not refer to them by name. That is by design. And it is also that way in Hanna's book, if you get that, and that is linked in the show notes. So with all that kind of clarified and my little intro here, I hope that you guys find this interesting and educational. And with no more further ado on this, I don't know, to me, somewhat monumental accomplishment of 300 podcasts, which is why I took the time to do a special intro here. Without any further delay, here is Hanna. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. And you can see this week I have guest Hanna Posner. Hey, how's it going?
Good.
Good. Posner? Poser. Prosser. Ah, yes. See, I did it again anyway. I butcher everybody's name. I think I might kind of have some sort of subliminal thing about doing it on purpose. I don't know why. I really don't want to do that, but somehow I constantly do it. Anyway, welcome to the show, Hanna. Thank you for being here.
Thanks.
You have a unique story. You have had a life of some pretty. You've had some pretty brutal experiences in your life, and I almost randomly came across you and your story and your experience. Somebody referred me to a Facebook post you had made, and. Yeah. I guess maybe we could start there, and then we'll kind of go into the backstory and your experiences. But you know, this was literally pretty random. Like, hey, Chris, did you see this? And I go look at it, like, my goodness, you know, here's this person saying that you've led this whole life, but you had a childhood of extreme abuse connected with religion, connected with the Mennonites. And this is something, of course, I've always been a little curious about. I don't really totally understand the whole Amish Mennonite thing. But besides the specifics of that, frankly, the brutality of what you experienced growing up was so impinging, was so affecting to me that I reached out because I was like, wow, maybe this is a story that should be told more broadly. I find out you're writing a book, which you've now published just the other day. And so now this is the first podcast we get to publish and promote that. And that your story was quite extensive. And so I invited you onto my podcast to discuss that. So welcome to the show, Hanna.
Thanks.
Okay. So what was it that prompted you maybe to write that to start with?
Well, I wound up having kind of a breakdown mid to late 2020. And I've spent all these years in silence. I've been out here, been worldly for about 14 years, and I hadn't told anybody. I could not tell a soul. And then this kind of breakdown happened, and I was planning to end everything because I could not take just the immense everything that happened, and I couldn't take the silence. It was so heavy and so horrible. And I felt like before I ended it, I had to tell my story. And that was really, really important to me. And I wasn't sure, how I was going to put it out or what I was going to do. But I started writing, and it was really hard to just kind of keep going and stick around long enough to finish it. But I felt like I had to finish my story. And as I was writing it, I started telling people little bits and pieces here and there around me. My husband had no idea. My few friends that I have had no idea. Nobody had any idea that this had happened to me, and so then I wound up the Facebook post. I started posting on Facebook kind of as a trial to see how people would react. And my Facebook, I primarily was using at the time for business because I own Hooligans Forge. But so these people had no idea this was coming.
Just out of nowhere.
Probably a little bit surprised when I made a post explaining that, I put trigger warnings on it, the very first post, and explained a bit of my story. And I got really great responses. In my mind, I felt like people were going to say, okay, you did deserve it. You must be bad. You must be not normal. What did you do to cause it? What did you do that led to everything happening to you? And I didn't get that at all. And it was just absolutely amazing. And then, like you mentioned, your friend reached out to you. They were one of my Facebook friends. And so, and I didn't even know him. He just started commenting on my posts, and I posted a few more here and there randomly, a little bit more about my story. And he reached out to me and said, hey, I have this friend that does this podcast. If he wanted to, would you be interested in working with him? And I was like, well, I don't know, but maybe, kind of thing. But I gave him permission to reach out to you. And so he reached out to you, and you reached out to me. So that's just what happened. Yeah.
Well, awesome. And, it's worth commenting on that you did get nothing but support. You make this announcement to your friends, but like you mentioned, these are also business contacts. These are just people you've met in the course of life and living, right? And yet there's nothing but support. And yet you thought it was going to be, misogyny, 101 all over your line. You don't know what you're talking about. You deserved it. You had it coming, right. Et cetera, et cetera. Nice juxtaposition there, actually, because, I like highlighting things like that because there really is only, the really bad people, the really bad elements, the people who are going to respond that way. I mean, that's really a small percentage of people. And it's fortunate and good that they weren't around to dirty up your attempt to, hey, something happened to me. I want people to know,
Absolutely.
And it was. Mm-hmm.
The responses, I mean, just the way everybody around me has reacted has been so positive. Between that and writing the book and realizing that, maybe it can help somebody even. That kind of helped a lot. And I do want to say that I have, kind of healed and moved on, and, things are much better. So.
Right. Yeah. You're not still you're not still in that abusive situation now.
Yeah. No.
Right. And that's really good. And it obviously has taken time to process it, think about it, have a breakdown over, that. I mean, last year was pretty stressful for all of us, so I understand. Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. Well, let's go ahead and get into it then, because this is a lifelong story for you. This starts early for you, and you are unfortunate enough to have, some authoritarian kind of abusive factors, parents in your life who, well, it was pretty bad. Why don't you go ahead and start at the beginning and walk us through what occurred?
Okay. Well, first of all, I was not born Holderman Mennonites. I was actually born worldly. And my dad was a doctor. And in my book, I refer to him only as Ahaz. That's what I named him. Sorry. Anyways, so we lived in Tompkinsville, Kentucky. And I had 4 siblings at the time, and we were homeschooled. We were not allowed to have any friends.
Okay. And just to clarify, when were you born?
1988.
Okay, so this is the late 80s that you,
Yeah.
and 90s that we're talking about in terms of time period of growing up in this.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So you have a father. You're calling it. You're using a pseudonym in the book, but he's pretty abusive.
Yeah.
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 Okay. So how did this happen?
Well, at first he was primarily the most abusive to my older brother. I did have an older brother named Thomas, and he was so horrible to Thomas that Thomas wound up, kind of hurting his siblings, just kind of I don't know. I guess he was just mimicking what was being done to him. And
well, yeah, that's how it happens.
Yeah. So, things, it definitely wasn't good, and I wanted to especially talk to other kids. That was the biggest thing at the time. I wanted to have a friend. I wanted to talk to kids. We weren't supposed to watch TV, but we did have one that was underneath the basement staircase closet. And we were only supposed to pull it out for if there was like tornado warnings, something like that to watch. But sometimes my mom pulled it out when Ahaz went to work at an ER out of town. And so sometimes we would watch like Barney and stuff like that. So I saw relationships. And I just really wanted to have friends. And we had like a little neighbor boy across the street we couldn't be friends with. And we would sit on opposite sides of the road and try to talk to each other. And
wow. You couldn't even cross the street to actually make physical contact or
no.
See, and this highlights God, in child rearing of all places, this really highlights the isolation factor. This is a real key component for your experience, is the isolation. You were kept, almost from the beginning of your life, you were kept segregated from the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And that kind of isolation is extremely unhealthy for so many reasons. Anyway, please continue.
Well, Mom used to take us to the library, which was just down the street, so that we could see other kids. And that was literally the reason, so we could see them. We weren't supposed to talk to them. Sometimes I would like see a kid and I would try to go up to him and be like, hi. And that was, a really big win for me. So.
Wow. Wow. So what was just so we can kind of set the stage here, because there's going to be an awful lot of, what the fuck and why was this happening, right? So maybe we should try to explain early on here, because your father is the key figure driving this, right?
Right.
And I do want to talk about the difficulties that your mother had. Because she would she would kind of fly back and forth in this, kind of stuck in the middle of this awful situation. What was driving your father? What sort of things are driving this? Okay, I have to keep my 3 kids segregated and protected from the rest of the world, so much so that they can't even have vocal or verbal interaction with other kids. Where's this guy's head at? What's driving this?
He was just seeking more and more control. He read a lot of books on religion, a lot of books on proper discipline and proper placement of how a wife should be, that kind of thing. And he wanted more and more of the old time ways where the women and children meant nothing. And to him, we really didn't mean anything. We were his property. And he made sure that we kind of knew that. Nothing that we had belonged to us, not even our toys. They didn't belong to us. They belonged to him. And it was just, it's crazy.
Well, it is. It is really nuts. It's also a window into, as you said, the old ways. The world's moved on. The world is moving on very actively from this barbaric sort of, everybody is property except the male head of household.
Yeah.
And this has been, unfortunately, a cultural value that has been shared for ages, for centuries. This has been reality in the world, that this is how societies were formed and centered around this concept. And now we're finally evolving past that. And yet there's still these old relics and these, you know, these old folks who cling to this old way of thinking and think that that's the way it should be, that that's the way God intended for it to be, that that's what the scripture says it's supposed to be. And this is what we're fighting. And so this is kind of a window into what life looked like 100, 200, 300 years ago for most people. And it's truly awful. It is awful when you view it through a lens of human rights. So, okay, so that all being said, so we have religious and control factors at play here in this guy's personality, and this is just how he thinks the world is supposed to be this way, and he's enforcing this on you guys as his family because he has the power to do so. Yeah. Okay.
And my sister, my mom, and I, we had to wear skirts or dresses all the time. But then, you know, I was a little girl. I wanted to play. I wanted to turn somersaults. I wanted to climb trees. And I would get in trouble for doing things like that because I was a girl and because I was wearing a skirt. Well, you know, I just wanted to play, you know, but I would, and even if the wind came along and like picked up my dress, that was somehow my fault. And to me, skirts and dresses are not modest on little girls. Because why can't they play? You know, it's more modest to wear pants or shorts or something so that they stay covered. But that's not how that worked in his mind.
Nope.
We had to,
Wow.
We're modest the other way around.
Wow. So you grew up in Kentucky?
Yes.
Okay. And which I guess is a little bit of the accent. And how many years, I mean, so you have this strict household that you're growing up in, but it's not Mennonite yet. It's not formal religion. It's just sort of religious, kind of God's kind of in the background in some fashion telling him to do this, but not really like you're going, what was the church experience for those first years? Did you go to a church? What was how were you brought up religiously?
So my grandpa actually had his own church, and he was a preacher, and it was a missionary Baptist church. And my family pretty much made up the majority of the people that attended. So there was a few other family members, some older ones, of course. You know, my grandparents would be there, and I don't know. Sometimes some cousins would come every now and then, and sometimes, you know, my grandparents would talk someone else in the town to coming, but it wasn't too incredibly frequent.
Right. And this was at a church or in their living room?
It was at a church.
So they had a formal setup.
Yes. Well, technically, it was an old house that he had bought and turned into his church. And then he wound up starting to build a literal church right beside it towards the end. Okay. He started working on that. Yeah.
Okay. And were your grandparents the same kind of strict authoritarians that your father was?
No.
Huh. See, that's interesting. That's fascinating, because usually you see it as a sort of, you know, taught behavior going down the line, but somehow your father really went to the extreme with this. What was your grandfather and grandmother? What were they like growing up?
They were nice. Well, my granny didn't like me an incredible amount, but you know, my mom said that it was because that I acted so much like her that she couldn't stand seeing a mirrored replica of herself. We both have very, very strong personalities. Right. So, yeah. Anyway, so, you know, it's okay. And my grandpa, he had, you know, his favorites. So they were pretty much the oldest two, Thomas and Sarah. So.
Okay. Yeah. Did they were they around much? How much of an influence were they, or how much visiting did they do? Did they come around at holidays? Like, what was your life like growing up? Because it was very, I mean, we have established it was very controlled and very isolated. So what was life like in the, Proser household as you were growing up, and how much of an influence were the grandparents on the day to day?
So my grandparents lived maybe like a mile and a half, 2 miles away. Okay. And they would come over pretty frequently. My gramps especially, he would drive around town if, like, say Ahaz wasn't home, if he was out of town at an ER and my mom took us to the grocery or something, and he drove by the house and realized the van wasn't in the driveway, then he would proceed to drive around town and figure out where we were. So, and I don't know if that was something that Ahaz had him do, or if it was something he did out of retired boredom or what.
Interesting. So, and he would then report back to your father?
Back, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So he was kind of enabling the behavior.
Potentially.
Yeah. I mean, reporting back.
Yes.
I mean, yeah, it seems pretty clear he was helping him out, right? Because I'm imagining now, I mean, based on having read what you wrote and everything, of course, I know a little bit more than the listeners right now, but he, of course, would report back to your father, and then what would happen?
Usually Ahaz would get really mad at mom if we were somewhere that he didn't think that we should be, which occasionally we went out to eat. And there were only a few restaurants in the town. It was a really, really, really tiny town. But sometimes we'd go to one of the restaurants, and he didn't always like that. Or if he just wanted, I feel like he just wanted her to just stay at home. Oh, and she wasn't allowed to have friends either. I should point that out. It wasn't just us kids. She wasn't even supposed to talk to her parents.
She wasn't even supposed to talk to her own parents?
Yeah. He hated it because they could see what a horrible person he was, and they made no qualms about it. Like, they did not try to hide it. None.
Wow.
Yeah. It was very, very obvious. But they lived in Lexington, Kentucky. So they were a few hours away. So, but sometimes mom would take us to see them. And it was really special. I loved their house. It was beautiful.
Right.
And the house was beautiful. So that was
well, yeah, very different from the place you were growing up in. Now, again, no TV, no radio?
So radio, I remember we had it when I was really, really, really little. And of course we did have it inside the vehicle, but it got to the point that we were no longer supposed to listen to the radio either.
So what were you supposed to be doing all day? What was it your father imagined you would be doing all day if you weren't reading books, watching TV, or listening to the radio, or playing with other kids? What was it he imagined this idyllic life, family life would be for you guys?
Well, of course, we were homeschooled. And so my mom was our teacher. And we weren't allowed outside until after school had let out for the day, because neighbors kept calling to report, even though kids technically go outside for a recess, that if we were outside playing, that just wasn't a good thing to the neighbors. But so we would be indoors until school was out, and then we could go play sometimes. We did like to, hit a ball around with a bat in the front yard a lot of times. And then I was always climbing trees, even though I wasn't supposed to. You
were a little tomboyish.
I was.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, of course, was just another reason to punish you.
Yes.
Now let's since we've talked so much about isolation and control, let's go ahead and talk about some of the discipline right now, because I think we should get to that to sort of set the stage here for just how bad this was. So when you stepped out of line, talked to somebody else, were caught breaking whatever arbitrary rules existed in the house, what happened?
We would be whipped. But it wasn't, your traditional little whipping, or what I would think of when you think of spanking or anything. It was horrible to the point it would leave bloody welts.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. So was this equally meted out to you, your older brother and sister?
No. So it was primarily the worst of it Thomas was getting. And then my sister Sarah, she did not get any of it. She was very proud of the fact that she had not had a whipping or spanking or anything done to her since she was 2 years old. Everyone seemed to believe she was a goody two shoes, but yet she would do stuff and then blame it on us. And because everybody believed her, from grandparents to my mom, like everybody, just whatever she said was the golden truth, period. Didn't need to be questioned. It just had to be the truth. She would do things and then blame them on Thomas or I, which we got into stuff too. You know, we were kids. But there was a lot of times we had to take, the brunt of things she had done.
Wow.
So, and then me, at the time, I wasn't quite what I would call the it kid yet. So it definitely was not as severe to me as to Thomas, but.
Okay. So your older brother was getting the brunt of it for the younger years, but you were also getting beaten to the point of bleeding.
Yeah.
Multiple times because of your antics, and your sister's coping strategy for this and way of dealing with the threat was to misdirect.
Yes.
While your brother, his coping strategy from what you wrote and what we talked about tended to be beaten up on you guys.
Yeah.
So he's imitating, the authoritarian figure, and your sister's figuring out how to outwit it. Mm-hmm. And you're stuck in the middle, getting beaten by your father, your brother, and outwitted by your sister and getting punished for that.
Yeah.
So it was a real survival of the, tooth and claw kind of survival for you growing up.
Yeah.
In this, I mean, when you talk about physical beatings to the point of bleeding, I mean, we're talking about straight up child abuse. This goes beyond any reasonable or unreasonable metric of, kids should be disciplined and kids should be slapped around a little bit to be shown the guidelines. I don't agree with that at all. I think that's child abuse. But some people have this idea that you can slap kids around, and as long as you're not leaving permanent marks, it's not that big of a deal. But even they have nothing to say on this, because this was a situation where you were being beaten in a way that an adult, anybody, could go to the police and go, what the hell? And people would end up in jail for it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the kind of discipline you were experiencing your entire childhood.
Yeah. Which even in my book, I still refer to that time frame as whipping, because even though I know technically it's definitely still considered beating, it's nothing compared to what happened later. So to me, it's so much less, but it was bad. It was bad. Yeah. So it just wasn't happening.
Well, the name of your book is Beat.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the central theme here. So I get what you're saying about the increasing levels of violence as you got older. That's pretty par for the course for abusers. They just up the stakes, because they feel that they're losing control if they don't. I guess who knows what the hell's going on in a psychotic mind. Could be even worse. I mean, there could have been an intent to even kill you. I mean, who knows? I can't speak subjectively to your father's mental state, but we can certainly speak critically about what he did. So, okay, so please, I asked you about life growing up and what kind of things you guys were doing. You had homeschooling. Any other activities or any other things you guys were spending your time doing that was acceptable as far as your father was concerned?
We would go to the park sometimes, which we still weren't supposed to really talk to or associate with other kids if they were there. But we would get to go and, swing and climb and play and all that stuff. There was also some library events we used to go to, which was a lot of fun. But that did wind up being stopped because we had went to some that had like clowns and magic show type stuff. And of course, there was a bunch of other kids there. So I was in the same room with kids all around me, but I couldn't, talk to them or interact with them or anything. But once we went back to the house, us kids were all still talking about it because it was just, crazy cool for us. It was really neat. And he got very, very angry, and it just is completely forbidden because magic isn't real. He was screaming at my mom. It was just horrible.
Wow.
So there wasn't a lot of things that we were allowed to do. We were, for the most part, trapped in the house or, able to play outside, but still can't go play with the neighbor boy. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it's a pretty sick situation when there really isn't any alternative for you. So everything you do results in punishment, basically, just for the crime of basically being a kid and being interested in the world around you.
Yeah.
Okay, so how did your mom, well, one, get into this, and then two, deal with it? Because she married this man, had these children with him, watched this abuse go on. Now, and I'm not in any way, shape, or form, am I approaching this or asking you about this from the position of, your mom's a bad person.
Right.
I talked with her, right? Mm-hmm. And speaking with you about this and the fact that the accusations were so, intense, I wanted a little bit of corroboration, and speaking with her about that was very helpful. So I'm not in any way pillaring your mom right now, but I am wanting to understand, from your perspective and having spoken with her during and after all of this, so as you have, what was going on with her? How was she in this situation?
Well, I think it just kind of kept escalating, and so she just kept going with it. But she felt like she would be able to change it at some point. She argued with him a lot on, okay, well, this isn't right for the kids. This is bad. This isn't fair to me. The kids need to be in public school. They need to be able to have friends. She needed to be able to have friends and be able to talk to her parents without having to hide in the bedroom with the phone. She just wound up staying. My grandparents, her parents, actually offered her a way out. They were wealthy, of course, living here in Lexington. And on one of our trips up here, one of those rare trips, I heard them talking, and they offered her a way out. They were going to pay for the house. They were going to pay for everything all us kids needed. There were, 5 of us at the time. I had my older brother, sister, then me, then 2 younger siblings. Of course, they don't remember this time at all. They're too little. But they were going to take care of everything. They were going to get us all new clothes. They were going to just get us out, give us a safe place, and she wouldn't take it. And that was a standing long-term offer. And I don't understand. I truly don't understand why she kept staying. But I believe, and we've talked a little bit, about it. But from what I can figure out, she was afraid of losing us kids and not being able to take care of us kids because there were so many of us, and not being able to afford us all. Because that's, really expensive. But she had a way out.
Right. But somehow she didn't see it as a way out, or it wasn't acceptable to her somehow. Yeah. I mean, because it sounds a little strained, oh, well, I won't be able to afford it. Like, okay, yeah. I doubt that's the real reason. Was there, well, let me ask you this. Did you ever observe during the time you grew up, and we didn't talk about this at all beforehand, was there ever a time where your father acted pleasantly, warm, loving, caring toward her or toward you guys? Was there ever did he ever change it up? Because there was so much awful, as you've described, right? Was there ever any nice?
He would especially if we were out in public. It was all, we are such a happy, loving family. And, I'm a doctor and I take care of my kids. And people would ask us, aren't you so happy that your dad is so great? And it must be wonderful that your dad's a doctor and all this stuff. And I just wanted to tell them he's a freaking asshole.
Right.
I could say that on him.
Well, no, of course you didn't say that in a social setting. Did it ever confuse you
Well, I understood that it was all for show.
Mm.
It definitely, because as soon as we were back at the house, it was just completely different. It was always for show. It was never real.
Right. And you could see that because you watched it, the back and forth of it. Do you think your mom ever bought into it?
Well, she knew it was for show too.
Okay.
She was also expected to play the part of the happy wife. He always expected that from her. And of course, he expected us kids to always play the part of the happy kids and the happy family. It was very much a huge expectation.
Okay. I'm just wondering, I'm not trying to fit a round peg into a square hole at all. I'm just wondering out loud as we're talking right now. There's a thing called trauma bonding. Mm-hmm. This is also, better understood broadly as battered wives syndrome.
Yeah.
Why do they stay? Why would they put up with all that? The gaslighting, the physical abuse, the control, the isolation, all of it. And it has to do with the fact that there's rewards sometimes too. It's not all bad. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it's wonderful. Sometimes the guy does things it buys you things or does things for you or seems to give you liberties or privileges that are, above and beyond. And it's also wonderful for a little time. And then the awful comes back. And it's a little cyclic, not universal. Not everybody does this. And I'm not trying to, like I said, that's why I'm not trying to, round peg your square hole if that's not the case with what was happening with your family. It sounds an awful lot like it was just awful on top of awful on top of awful. And I'm just wondering, was there ever any peace or any time where he seemed like he actually cared about you guys or loved you in any way?
Well, I know Mom said that he used to make her a lot of promises when she would try to leave.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
And there were times, because she did leave him several times over the years. And even I believe once when I was little, I remember us going to my grandparents' house in Lexington without him. And I think that she actually left him that time. And I know he used to try to play with my plastic horses with me. I had a super obsession with Breyer horses. And my mom and my aunt and a few people had given me some. And so I played with them all the time. And sometimes he would, get down on the floor with me to play with them. But he, it's so strange because with the toy horses, even though I was a kid, you know how you talk with toys? I couldn't make my toys talk. They had to neigh. And that was pretty much it. They could neigh as horses. They could grunt as horses. They couldn't have conversations back and forth. And of course, as a kid, I wanted to have my little horse adventures and have them run around and have friendships and play out with me, and I couldn't do that. I would get, he would beat me, whip me for that, So
see, that's so interesting because he would really run that. I mean, that's a recurring theme.
Yes.
Is anything, even the slightest bit more than normal?
Yeah.
Horses talking, child's imagination of assigning personalities to dolls. I mean, this is absolutely normal behavior, right? And no, this is the devil's work or something somehow. Was he relating it to religion early on, or was it just kind of that's just not right because it's just not right? Was he bringing God into it?
No, not specifically, but it was because it wasn't natural. So he believed everything should be naturally the way it was, which of course in itself, plastic horses are unnatural anyways. But I was allowed to have the plastic horses. I just couldn't unnaturally play with them. I still did though, just not when he was around.
Exactly. The thought policing didn't quite work. Okay. Got it on that. So at what point then does the organized religion come into this picture? Because there's a point where you guys are going along and then something happens and then it gets even worse, if that's possible. So do you want to talk about what happened and how that changed everything?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, He discovered the Holderman Mennonites after he had looked around for a stricter community, because he wanted to put us all somewhere, where women are, nothing, and kids are nothing, and men are head of household and hold the power and control over everything. He was looking at Amish, and he took us to an Amish church once too, and was talking to them. But then he found these Holdermans in Tennessee, and they weren't quite as strict as the Mennonites, but as the Amish, but they still, didn't have TV, all that stuff. And he started taking us to this church to go to services and such. Well, he was trying to talk my mom into changing over and moving down there. And she kept refusing. She kept saying that we needed, more liberties. We needed to go to public school. We need friends. We need to have a real life and be able to wear pants, simple things. And there came a day where my older brother, Thomas, and I know I mentioned he was kind of abusive to us siblings. I was playing in my room, and I heard screaming and shouting, and I could hear Thomas and my mom, and that sounded like there was a scuffle. And I went out into the hallway, and I could see into the living room, and my older brother was on top of one of my smaller brothers, and my little brother wasn't moving. He was like this purplish blue color.
And about how old was your older brother at this point?
He was 12.
12 years old. Okay. And your younger brother, who was on the floor?
He would have been about 6.
About 6 years old. Okay, good. Just to give a picture here of what we're talking about.
And my mom was trying to pull Thomas off, the little one. And it was bad. I just looked, I knew my brother was dead. He was clearly not the right color. He wasn't moving. My mom did wind up getting Thomas off of him and wound up performing CPR, brought him back and all that stuff.
Well, okay, let's highlight that for just a second here. Okay. Yeah. I brought him back and all that stuff. Yeah. Your older brother killed your younger brother, and correct. He had to bring it, and your mother had to resuscitate him.
Yes.
Okay. Now, it's a little hard to get vengeful about a 12-year-old doing that. It's more, oh my God, what the hell just happened?
Right.
So I'm not in any way trying to point your older brother in as a murderer per se. Right. But the act is the act. He did what he did.
And he was an abused boy, too.
That's what I'm saying. Is
severely abused.
Yeah. We have a product here of 12 years of straight up isolation, control, coercive control and abuse.
Exactly.
Right. And when we talk about isolation here, we're not talking about, I think we've painted a picture. We could paint it more if we need to, but I think we're pretty clear about this. No friends, no outside world connections, no social media, no TV, no movies, no radio, no books in terms of adventure and excitement or anything worldly. And this is what you get after 12 years of that.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely. He drove him insane. Drove Thomas insane.
My point.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I cannot look at that 12-year-old, any 12-year-old, because I don't know your brother personally, but I can't look at that story and situation as you've described it and put the onus of responsibility on that 12-year-old.
Yeah.
For that situation, and yet it is the most horrifying situation you can imagine. One child trying to take the life of another. Wow. Yeah. So, okay. So your mother, thankfully, was able to save her other son's life. And he's still alive and well and everything's fine.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. So we know that the outcome's okay. Mm-hmm. That all being said, what happened next?
Well, then I remember Ahaz being there, and I wasn't sure where he had been before. I was pretty sure he had been in the basement, because by this point he had also built himself a doctor's office in the basement and was seeing patients down there. Okay. So my grandpa wound up coming and picking up Thomas, and everyone went outside and there was yelling and screaming. You know, the grandparents are yelling back at Ahaz, and he's yelling at them, and Thomas runs and jumps in the car, and they take off. So they're gone. And we go back in the house, and Ahaz is, you know, screaming at my mom and wants to move right that very minute, to go down to the Holderman Mennonite community in Muddy Pond, Tennessee.
Okay.
And we wound up all being forced into the van, all four of us remaining kids, and then, you know, mom and Ahaz. And I wasn't allowed to go even for my toy horses, which was a really big deal when you have nothing else to hold on to and you're as isolated as I was. I mean, that was just even traumatic in itself. I couldn't go get my horses. And we had no clothes. We took nothing. And everybody was crying. And it was just crazy. You know, police had never been called, or an ambulance. Nothing happened, you know, for my younger brother, which he was, you know, technically okay. He was alive. And I don't think he remembers it, by the way. So,
wow. Yeah, you almost hope not, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he was old enough to, but I'm pretty sure he doesn't. But
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he might be surprised.
I mean, I can only imagine he must have had some bruising and some issues. I mean, my goodness, it's so fortunate that your mother was there and able to resolve that situation, because your father certainly was nowhere in sight until after it was over. Yeah. In terms of the, you know, then you guys get in a car or a van and you just drive straight out, just straight away, leave the state, leave everything behind, and end up in Missouri. Just to talk about this quickly, to give people a little context, the Church of God in Christ, Mennonite,
yes,
is the Holderman Mennonites. Christian church of Anabaptist heritage. Its formation started in 1859 under its first leader, John Holderman, who died in 1900. It's very similar to conservative Mennonites, but has stayed away from other conservative Mennonites because of its true church doctrine and its practice of excommunication. In 2013, the church had 24,400 baptized members. So that's the group your father took you all into. And yeah, you can look them up on Wikipedia, I guess, if you want to look into the specifics of the dogma or the scriptures. But it's very isolationist, very misogynistic, and very abusive to everybody but the male heads of household who participate in that activity. It's 1,000% beneficial to all the guys, and 1,000% abusive to all of the women and children.
Absolutely, yes.
And that's the community your father took you to as a result of this incident. So obviously curious what happened with your older brother, and you guys get out of the van and there you are, and now what?
Well, we did wind up staying in a hotel for a little while, and they found a house to rent very quickly, and we moved into that. My older brother was still with my grandparents, and my grandparents wound up trying to get custody of him, like full custody, and due to abuse and all that.
Yeah.
And they wound up, my sister and I wound up having to have a physical. And also I'd like to note that when we moved down there, he stopped whipping/beating me there for a little while. And I didn't know why. Mm-hmm. He was, and like you mentioned being nice before, he was being nice during that time.
Okay.
And my mom was super depressed. She was, just crying all the time, kind of hiding. And we didn't have a lot of supervision during then. But so my sister and I had to go for these physicals. And the reason is my grandparents also wanted my sister, Sarah. They didn't want me. But the reason why I had to go for a physical was because they knew that he left marks on me. And so they were using me to prove abuse so they could get my sister. Now, if I had been covered, in cuts at the time, then, I don't know what would have happened to me. But again, he had stopped. And I am positive it's because he knew this was coming. He was anticipating something like this. And so he just stopped. Wow. As soon as we were past the physical, it was right back to it.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay. And a little awful there on the part of your grandparents. A little bit awful there. They know you're physically abused to the point of bleeding, by being beaten, and yet they're okay with leaving you there.
Yeah.
Not a great situation. I am really sorry you had to grow up in this. This is not at all fair to you from the very get-go.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, well, what happened under the Mennonites then?
Well, my parents wound up joining, of course, and the Holderman Mennonites, they actually only get education till the 8th grade because they're religious exempt. And so they had a big conversation, a big meeting about, what to do, because Ahaz was a doctor and he already had all this education. So it was determined that, since he had the education prior to knowing better, that they would allow him to join, and because being a doctor was a good thing, that he would be allowed to continue to practice as a doctor.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's now in this isolated, y'all are in this isolated sort of community, just not particularly outward facing, not particularly interested in bringing the world to it. Mm-hmm. So these guys are all hiding in Mud Creek.
Muddy Pond.
Muddy Pond. Okay.
It was close. Yeah.
Muddy Pond. So we're going to go hang out in a muddy pond and live the life that God wants us to live. And what changed? I mean, in terms of your experience of life and living, now that you're part of this community where you are now, if I have this right, at least you're now able to go out and talk to people. Yes,
in the community.
Okay.
Yes. So we got to go to school for the first time, and it was a very tiny church school. It's literally built into the side of the church, and there were 2 classrooms that were used primarily with 2 teachers, unless there was kindergartners, and then they would have a 3rd teacher, and they would be in this really tiny, almost large walk-in closet type room for their class. Okay. But the school, I never had more than 20 or so. And the first year I was there, I think it was the biggest it ever was. And it seemed to keep kind of dwindling after that, just because of kids graduating and whatnot. And not a lot of kids were coming in, to kindergarten and 1st grade.
Right. I can't imagine there was a whole lot of folks flocking to, Muddy Pond, whatever. Yeah.
I mean, there were tourists. There was tourist attractions down there in the community. Mm-hmm. But as far as, people joining, definitely not a lot.
No. And that's a good thing. We're okay with that as we roll this out. So how old were you when this happened, when you were thrust into this community?
I was 9 years old. All right.
So first time you're getting any kind of quote unquote formal education, 9 years old.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. That, and I could finally have friends. And granted, there wasn't a lot of kids to be friends with, but one of the girls, Joyce, I got really, really close to her right away. I was really latched onto her, and she was definitely one of my lifelines for sure.
Wow. And in what way? How did that develop for you as a 9-year-old? Was she also 9?
She was a year younger than me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. And what were you guys? You finally found somebody to connect with.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was great. And Ahaz literally told us, okay, now these are kids that are acceptable to play with. You can play with these kids. And it was like we were released, and my mom was released to have friends and make friends among the Mennonite women.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, this also came with dress codes, codes of conduct, morality. How did that impact you as a 9-year-old and then growing up in this? What was that environment really like on a day-to-day?
Well, at first it wasn't so bad because, I got to go to school, I got to have a friend, but the women and girls had to have all our clothing handmade. Now, the guys and the boys, they didn't. They had store-bought clothes. But for the women, we had to have a very specific style of dresses. We even had to have elastic in the waistbands of our dress, which is just seems silly. And I would ask the ministers questions like, am I going to go to hell if I don't have elastic in my dress? Like, why does this even make sense? Like, nowhere in the Bible does it say that you have to have elastic in your dress to go to heaven. Yeah, I asked so many questions down that line, and I definitely stood out as being unruly because I asked questions like that, but they were very genuine questions because I really truly wanted to know. I wasn't being rude. I really wanted to know. If there's not a true reason behind it, then what does it matter if I don't do it?
Right. What kind of responses did you get?
Well, it was just kind of the way things were done. At first, people didn't seem to mind too much because I was coming in from, the world, right? But then it got to the point where people had, answered questions so many times and I kept pointing them out. I'm like, this doesn't make sense. If there's no logic behind it, then why? And so that just made me bad, and it made me unruly and a bad influence because I would not stop questioning things.
Right. See, this is the point. This is actually, I would like to take a moment to stress something here in this story because of what you just said, what you just described. And what you just described is the exact break-off point for first generation versus second generation believers in a thing. This is why, communes fail. This is why communism has failed. This is why all these stupid things always fail, right? Is because the first gen true believers have, for whatever reason, bought into this storyline, this fantasy, this nonsense, whether it's Scientology, whether it's Mormonism, whether it's the Mennonites, whatever the religion is, it's generally pretty ridiculous. And when you add abuse on top of it, it becomes destructive. And for the children, they were never consulted. They were never asked. Their input is completely devalued. Their views are completely devalued. They are considered little blank slates, little dolls that we can play with. This is the view of adults who get into cults, who get into these high control groups, these situations where they're all in, and they think because they're all in that their kids should be all in. Well, the kids happen to have their own mind. And their own viewpoint and their own attitudes and beliefs and personalities and ideas that come naturally to them, that are the nature part of the picture, not the nurture part. They're the part that you just are who you are. And if you're not the kind of personality who's going to buy into this nonsense that your parents have bought into, you end up at the short end of the stick and end receiving the stick. Yeah. And this is where it becomes child abuse. And this is why I keep highlighting that religious indoctrination is child abuse. And I'm going to keep saying this probably till the day I die, because this is what I truly believe. When you as a parent, as an adult, you get to go off and be responsible for your own decisions, and you get to go do whatever you want to with your life. But when you force your children to follow your misguided ideas and abuse them in order to get them to toe the line and fall in line with what you think is reality, that's abuse. That's child abuse 100% of the time. So I wanted to kind of use that little bit there that you said, because I think it could otherwise be glossed right over, but I think it's the key to this whole thing is, as a grown adult, go do whatever the hell you want, believe whatever the hell you want, but you don't get to do that to your children.
Yeah.
And we have this barbaric Stone Age idea that children are just property. And I just rail against it so hard, I have to get on a soapbox for a moment. I'm getting off my soapbox now, and let's continue with your story. Thank you for your patience with me on that.
Fine.
So, okay. So so please continue with the Mennonite experience here.
Okay. So, the women, they were definitely supposed to be essentially servants to their husband. Their place was to serve him, to please him, to take care of the children, to clean, to just do what they were told pretty much. Their opinion was not valued. Right. And I know some of them will argue that it is, but it's not there. It is literally preached, and it's part of just everything. They are supposed to serve their husband. And I feel like the Holdermans definitely they're so brainwashed that they can't see outside of it, But for me being there, here I went from people in general being taboo to now these people are okay, but the world is still taboo. And it made worldly people, other people, outside people, strangers, whomever, just seem, it's really, I don't know, it's so difficult to explain. They were strange people. You couldn't talk to them or really associate with them. It just created just this really weird thing about people in general for me.
I'm sure that's true. I want to ask you about that a little bit. When you refer to the not okay adults, or the ones you have doubts or questions or fears about, are we talking about like the tourists who come through the town, or non-Mennonite folks who drive through for some reason and stop? Well, how often was that happening? What kind of adults, non-Mennonites, were you being exposed to during this time?
Well, tourists would definitely come by, definitely spring, summer, fall. And then, of course, Ahaz, he wound up, first he was going to ERs when we first moved down there, because, of course, he'd lost his office space in the basement when he moved because it was from a different house. He did wind up building an office in the back of the house that we got. Because, we got a rental when we first moved down there, and then they moved into one that was like rent to own.
Okay.
And so they got that. He wound up building onto the back and having an office. So there were worldly patients coming around frequently. And so, and they would, even have to come in, use the bathroom, tell me how great my dad was and how proud I must be, and all kinds of stuff, or how cute my little homemade dress was. So I was actually around.
Interesting. And this was, and we should also mention earlier and now that your father's a licensed medical doctor.
Yes.
Who completely ignored you guys every time you got sick and had an accident, had an injury, much less he's beating all of you to the point of bleeding. So he's causing damage to you. But every time you have something happen to you that his skill set would be, useful for, he ignored you.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Which at this time, it was turning into me being the it kid now. Thomas was gone. My sister, she was never whipped, abused. Of course, she was mentally abused. So I do want to point that out, obviously, because the cult-like factor, just everything that was happening around us, that's still abuse to her.
Oh, absolutely. Good point, by the way, because people can tend to go good person, bad person in this situation. No, everybody in this situation is a victim.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But, my younger brothers, the focus wasn't on them either. They would get a little whipping every now and then. I know I saw some stripes on them before. I don't know that I ever saw them bleeding. And definitely the time spent whipping them was far less. Like, maybe 5-10 minutes type thing. For me, it just kept growing and becoming longer and longer. and look kind of the, escalation point.
Right.
But yeah.
Okay. So this is the kind of exposure you're having to the outside world. I'm assuming still no TV, radio, movies,
Nope.
romance novels, none of that, comic books, none of that stuff.
We couldn't even have music in church. So
Wow.
because it was musical instruments, we couldn't have a harmonica. We couldn't have harp, even though I pointed out in the Bible that people played harps and trumpets and stuff like that and danced to praise the Lord. Well, even though it says that in the Bible, we couldn't do that. No dancing. But as far as church school, the books were restricted. And even the moms would go through and proofread books before they would go into our little tiny bookshelf library.
Right.
And if there was a word like darn or gosh or gee, they would take a permanent marker and marker it out in a kid's book before it went on the shelf, because we weren't supposed to say gee or gosh or geez. We weren't supposed to know those words even.
Wow.
It was just kind of ridiculous. Yeah.
And this was also a life of asceticism in terms of no makeup, jewelry.
Yes.
You don't want any of that outside stuff.
No wedding rings, nothing like that.
Interesting.
The member females had to wear head coverings on their head. And on Sundays, or to church, period, because there was church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night, they would have to wear 2 head coverings. I also asked about that once I joined. I think I didn't ask that till once I officially joined. But I asked if my head was more sinful on Sundays.
Right?
Why do I have to wear 2? Why does everybody has to wear 2 to go to church? It was quite strange. Yeah.
Were there ever? Okay, now this is kind of important to me because I'm really curious about this. Were there ever sensible answers given to you that you could understand to questions like that, or questions that you were asking? Because I believe you were asking them sincerely.
Yeah.
What?
Not that I can remember, because it was pretty much, this is how it is. This is how it's always been. This is just the standard that we have. And because there wasn't, as far as a woman keeping her head covered, that's in the Bible. It doesn't say you got to wear 2 of them. There is nothing that says you have to wear 2 of them to walk into church.
Right.
Yeah. And then I asked things like, why could the men have modern clothing? They were just buying them from, Walmart, wherever. Now, they couldn't have emblems on them. Even a polo shirt, they weren't allowed to have, because it has, the polo emblem on it. But they could still have store-bought stuff, and yet we had to hand make our things. Right. Why can't we just go buy a modest dress from the store? I don't know. Yeah, but it was just the way it was. It was the rules. I wasn't supposed to be questioning the rules. I was supposed to just accept and follow. I was supposed to be a submissive female.
Right.
And I wasn't.
There it is.
Yeah.
Submissive. You're supposed to be submissive.
Mm-hmm.
That's the key word. That's the key word of all of this. You are supposed to submit. And the father figure takes on this divine authority and pretends that he's God or has the power of God, and therefore everything they say is infallible, not to be questioned, and free from error. And if you're questioning, you're the one who's wrong.
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yep.
I mean, what a perfect tailor-made system for misogynistic authoritarian control. And it's been that way for centuries. I mean, we're just pushing back against this now for real. If we're really going to be straight about it, why so much resistance? Because it's been around this way for millennia. That's why,
Yeah.
It's interesting to me also that the Mennonites specifically have no concept of divorce.
That's correct. They marry for life.
Yeah.
If you were to divorce, you would be expelled. You would be shunned. And that would be it. You cannot be a Mennonite and be divorced.
Right. And I wonder how much that factored into your father's calculations when he was reviewing which authoritarian sect, you know, should I join up with that will give me the most amount of control over my family? Well, these guys don't even, I mean, it's for life, and there's not even a concept of divorce in this group. So,
well, I do want to point out, no, I'm jumping ahead in time,
yeah.
but they're still actually married, and my mom actually left him in 2007, and she has remained married to him so that he won't be expelled, even though they live in different states.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to comment on the crazy of that. I'm just going to let that pass right by.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something. Yeah, no, I get it. I don't want to be judgy here as much as I can avoid it. Obviously, I'm going to be judgy as hell about authoritarianism because that just riles me up. But, you know, people make the decisions they make, and it's not for me to, you know, go telling them they need to make other decisions when it comes to something that personal. But I really struggle with stuff like that sometimes.
Yeah. Anyways.
Yes, please continue.
Oh, okay.
The Mennonite lifestyle. I'm curious if there's anything else that, you know, you watch movies like Witness, you know, you watch the Amish, you watch but then you watch stuff like Amish Mafia, which is just satire, just ridiculous, right? And you can have fun with it, and you go, okay, this is all just fun and games. But your life and your experiences were not fun and games. It was a very serious side of this. So I want to know more about it because I want to understand your experience. So what else was part of your existence growing up in this group that would communicate to other people just how different and outlandish it was?
Okay. Well, some other things that they did, there's no dating. There's no courtship, nothing like that. There's no rumspring. I know for some reason people just assume that they must have rumspring like the Amish. They don't.
Right. And let's make sure everybody understands what that Rumspringa is. What is that? How would you describe that?
Rumspringa is when certain groups, generally Amish, as a teenager, the parents turn their back for a period of months or even years and pretend that they don't know that their kid is sneaking out and going to parties and doing worldly things. And that's a period of time before they decide to whether or not to leave or to join the actual church that they are with.
Okay.
So fully commit to it.
Right. And that is generally considered a pretty wild time for those teens.
I've heard stories.
Yeah. And there's actually, just to let everybody know, I know personally of one person who has worked with others who have gone way out of their way to try to set up and help support people who are on that Rumspringa, who are doing that time out, to try to help them acclimate to the real world, because it's such a culture shock that right? Yes. And they tend to dive into the alcohol and even drugs and, you know, start making a little bit of money doing some construction work or something. And then it's like, oh my God. And then they can end up crawling back to their oppressive lifestyle from before, to, you know, because they kind of weren't prepared, and then end up, you know, dedicating their life to something goofy. If you can get them some support and some help and some, like, you know, a little bit of a system of support there, then they survive that process a little bit better.
Yeah.
Don't necessarily have to crash and burn in the process. But they don't have that with the Mennonites. No. So it's just expected you're in and you're going to stay in. Yes, absolutely. Because it is the right path, you know. Right. It's the only one. So, wow. Yeah. How many folks, out of your personal experience in that little group that you were in, about how many people were in the community? Give or take. Maybe kids included, maybe 200-ish, maybe a few fewer. So tiny. But yeah. Okay. And how many of the kids that you knew of or that you grew up with stayed? Actually, a reasonable amount of them left, at least of the females. Yeah. Good. They did. Yeah, there's several of them, but several of them are
still living in the Mennonite community there. They left and then they wound up coming back and married someone from the community and settled down there. There's a few that I know of that did that.
Yeah, bummer.
So, but
yeah, I get that. Well, I only say bummer. It's not because of the belief set. It's because of the abuse.
Yeah.
It's because of the misogyny. Okay, fair enough. So, yeah. Anything else to that lifestyle that we might want to know about or should know about relevant to your story?
Okay. So one really big thing that was huge to me was the education portion.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me was just absolutely horrifying because I love to learn, and as you can tell from all the questions that I mentioned asking, I had to just know things. I had to know the answers to things. I had to get to the bottom of everything, no matter what it was. And I also wanted to learn about the world because I was determined I wasn't going to stay there forever. I was gonna be able to get out, whether it was from my mom leaving or when I turned 18. There was never a point where I was going to stay.
Okay.
And I begged for education. I reasoned for it. I demanded that it was my right to have an education, and that so what if the Holderman Mennonites are religious exempt? I should be able to have a choice. Just because someone's exempt doesn't mean, you can't do it, right? I don't know. How about options? You can be religious exempt if you want to and not if you don't. I don't know, something. But things got really, really bad and started getting to the point where especially for all the questions I was asking for education, when even we would go, my mom would take me to the library and we would get library books and we'd sneak them back in grocery bags type deal. So he wouldn't know we were bringing them in the house. I was trying to learn and just figure out the world. And I had a strong personality. I knew who I was. I knew who I was going to be. But in order to make me fall in line and be the submissive little kid that he demanded I be, especially as a female who had no opinion, no voice, no thoughts he believed that females couldn't even come up with intelligent ideas.
Jesus.
Like we couldn't be creative.
Jesus,
and
man.
So the beating started to get to the point of where it became hours. And I told people this. I told our elder minister. I told someone else who was actually on the school board, which of course was made up of a few men, obviously.
You think? Yeah.
Right. But I tried to tell people, and I told quite a few, that this was happening for hours at a time even. And people either didn't believe it or they would maybe kind of almost believe it and just ask him about it. And then I was made out to be crazy, to be over exaggerating, to just be angry that I was being disciplined in any way. And he would talk about how important child discipline was. And so also when things got super, super bad, of course, to beat someone for hours, you have to have breaks. Mm-hmm. No one wanted to hear about the breaks. They just wanted to cut me off when I tried to say, this is what's happening, and it's happening for hours at a time. They didn't, I was told that it wasn't physically possible for a adult to physically be able to beat someone, a kid, me, for hours at a time. But it was possible because he did take breaks. He would stop. He would do it. He'd be rolling in sweat. He'd be breathing hard, and he would stop and take a break. And then he would go back to it. And it was just this continuous thing.
Jesus.
Yeah.
And he did that to your mom too? Well,
now, to my knowledge, he hit her with his hands. For me, it was primarily a stick, a leather strap he got from the leather shop there in the community, and a paddle. There were sometimes he would hit me with other things. There was a horse whip. there was a random board one time.
Jesus.
And then at the very, very end, he did start kicking me and punching me, one kind of thing. But that wasn't to the very, very end. It wasn't, you know.
And this was when you were just about leaving the house.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm assuming 17, 18 years old.
Yeah, I got out when I was 17 in 2006.
17. Okay, good. You finally got out of there.
Okay.
Did your grandparents succeed in getting your sister out?
No, they did wind up getting custody of my brother, and then Ahaz wound up somehow getting secret custody back in some way. I don't fully understand, but somehow he got a judge to sign custody back over to him without my grandparents knowing. So here he had custody again, and he sent a couple guys to go after my brother when my grandparents were not at the house. And they got him and they took him to a boys' work camp in Florida. And I don't have the name of the camp. You know, he was there for about 6 months before my grandparents were able to find him. They had to track him down. And because, of course, they had no idea what had happened, where he was. They managed to, after they found him, they managed to get emergency custody back. And they went and picked him up, and he was, you know, bruised and blistered and sunburned, and just, he wasn't talking very much, and he was never the same.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So, of course, I wasn't getting to see him during any of this time. So
how long was it till you reconnected with him?
I was 15 years old, and I saw him for about, I don't know, 30 minutes to an hour when I was 15 and he was 18. He had one of my grandparents set up a meeting through my mom that was super top secret. Ahaz didn't know. And I met him along with my sister, Sarah, at a restaurant. And we got to see him for just a little bit. But part of the deal was that my mom couldn't come inside. You know, he didn't want to see her. It only had to be me and my sister.
Okay. May I ask how that went? I know that might be intensely personal,
yeah.
and if so, you know, no worries.
No, it's okay. It went good. It was kind of awkward. You know, I asked him if, you know, I could come live with him, kind of thing, and, you know, talked about wanting to get out. And he told me to just hang on. You know, I would be 18 before too long, and there was, you know, nothing he could do. Just wait.
Right. And you finally got out a year later.
Well, it was about 2 years later.
Or 2 years later. Yeah. Okay. Wow. So that was after, I'm just curious, was that conversation before or after the work camp thing?
Oh, that was after. So
okay.
He would have been 12 or 13 when he went to that work camp. So he would have been 18 when I met with him next.
Got it.
It was about 6 years.
Okay.
From seeing him till seeing him again. And I actually haven't seen him since then. So. Oh,
wow. Okay. Have you spoken with him or just?
I have. A few years ago, we found each other on Facebook and we've exchanged a few messages. We've talked about meeting up. You know, we live pretty close to each other, actually, but we haven't done it yet. We've talked about it.
Okay. All right. Well, fingers crossed for you on that. I really hope that relationship can be restored somehow.
Yeah.
But, you know, that's just my outside whatever. It's obviously 1,000% on you guys as to what you want to do with that. So your father got custody, but then lost custody again. And all he really succeeded in doing was sending him down and making him crazier at the work camp. And then, so every time this guy gets anywhere near the kids, it's just awful. It's just awfulness.
Yeah.
Wow. So clearly we're not talking about family reunions.
No.
I mean, well, okay. So let me back up a second then and say, okay, so in the middle of all of this, you know, of all of this awful, how would you describe over time your relationship with your mom during all of this? I mean, there's indications that she was, trying to help in covert ways, with books and exposure and stuff like that, and trying to resist, the beatings and stuff by fighting back. So clearly she was, in your corner, all the time, or what happened there? How was that?
Well, once we turned Mennonite, she really didn't fight anymore for our rights.
Okay.
Not much. I think the day that we left and everything that happened that day, I think it broke her.
Yeah.
She had already been abused for years and being hit and screamed at and in this controlling situation. And then we go to this Mennonite community and she's not herself. She's very depressed. She cries a lot. Her face is puffy. I was very close to her, though. I have always been close to her. Even though, there's a part of me that does blame her for the fact that she never left. But at the same time, I have read up on abuse and domestic violence and different situations. And I do understand that, she must have really not felt like she could leave, I guess. So, when you're being abused, things look different.
Well, that's for sure. That's the understatement of the century. I will agree with you 1,000% on that. It really is a very difficult thing to be judgy about people who are in abusive situations, and it's something I want to avoid. Yeah. I'll judge the abuser all day long, but
yes.
But the person who's being abused is in a very difficult situation.
Yeah.
No question about it. Especially when it's relationship based, because there's love there. Yeah. And it gets all confused, because there's been a courtship and there's been this whole time period and there's been this whole, you bought into the fact that this is a good person and this is a person you want to spend your life with and you want to raise a family with. And then suddenly they become this like awful person and you're like, wait a minute, what happened? And sometimes it can take years to try to get your head around that. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the abuse doesn't stop and it just continues. And then it's, it's just a downhill toboggan ride to hell. So what about the community? You mentioned talking about or trying to alert other people to this abuse that was going on with you personally. Were you aware of, or were there indications that the similar kind of thing was happening in other families?
Not that I could see. And at the time, I still wasn't saying, I'm being beat. I was saying that I'm being whipped. And even though I talk about it being for extensive periods of time, I still, because it was referred to me as I was being disciplined, I was being corrected. Mm-hmm. But in other families, I would see that, like my friend Joyce, for example, she got whipped sometimes, but it was very brief. I was even at her house a few times when she did get, a spanking. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't anything even remotely close to what I went through. Right. A few hits and it's done.
So there is a difference, I think. Maybe this is worth commenting on. I don't know. I believe there is a difference between people who dogmatically go into a system where, okay, now I have to discipline my kid because that's what God wants me to do. And then, which sounds a little bit like where Joyce's folks were at, versus somebody who's just a straight up psychotic abuser.
Yeah.
And and then uses the religious dogma as justification for their psychosis. And I think that's more of what we're dealing with your father, unfortunately,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because I don't want to unfairly, as much as I will rag on Mennonites or Amish or people, who impose strict authoritarian high control systems on children, and I'm never going to agree with that. I don't want to paint them all as psychotic abusers.
Right.
Because that wouldn't be fair. And I want to label and I want to nail the things that we should nail.
Right.
But I don't want to go overboard with it and say, well, everybody in the Mennonite community is beating their kids until they're a bloody mess. But I am curious if there was anybody else that you were running into, because as you said, the very first thing you said is, well, not that I saw. Well, with all the women wearing dresses to their wrists and down to their ankles, you're not going to see a whole lot of the physical evidence of abuse.
Right.
So, but I'm wondering, did you hear about, were there rumors in that community? I mean, was it like any other community that way?
Well, I know that there were at least a couple other kids that I know when they spoke of, being punished, or even I overheard their parents talking about them having been disciplined, then it definitely was, I would say, severe as well. Okay. But to my knowledge, it wasn't something that would go on for hours. I just was under the impression, it was very, very forceful what was being done.
Right.
But to make sure that the behavior was, just cut off, completely corrected, would it never, ever happen again. But that, again, was, it was acceptable amongst the community.
Right. So yeah, because then you're going around saying, "Hey, look, this is out of control. This is excessive. You're disciplining. I'm getting tortured over here," and yet they just kind of turned a blind eye to that. Nobody was really too interested.
Yeah, I mean, the elder minister. I actually started calling the elder minister my grandpa because everybody else had family members and they had all this extended family, and once we were there, we were pretty much cut off from everybody. Not that we'd had, a lot of people before that, but still. So I was calling him grandpa. And so I always, with him, I definitely had the most conversations about just all kinds of things, the most questions about the Mennonites, the most that I told, about what was going on. And then I also, at the age of 13, I started being sexually abused by Ahaz as well. So, and he told me that it was because he said, this is like so TMI, but it's in my book too. Like I had started my monthlies and everything for the first time. And I can only assume that my mom most likely mentioned it to him or something. So he told me that he knew that I was a woman. And, that was... Yeah. Then he would beat me until I really couldn't fight him anymore. He would just beat me onto the floor and then, do his thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. First off, okay. I'm shocked and appalled, and that's awful. I'm very sorry that happened to you. Wow. So you're saying he full on sexually abused you. Wow. Okay. That's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah. Was that a one-off incident or was that a repeated occurrence?
It was repeated.
Okay. Do you want to say how often or how much that happened?
It was frequent. Once or twice a week or so up until pretty much about I got out. So over about 4 years.
Okay. Did your mother know?
I tried telling her. That he was touching me. He was doing really bad things to me. And she told me that, I needed to stop saying things like that about him, that there was no way. And she actually says she doesn't remember it because we've talked about it since.
Okay.
But she said, if I had ever tried to tell her that she would have done something about it. I'm like, I did. And the elder minister, and there was another woman I wound up telling as well. She was actually from another congregation. And they actually, I guess the two of them kind of got together and had talked about me. the elder minister and this woman from the other congregation in Murray. And they both asked me specifically if I was being raped. And I can only assume it's because I was trying to tell people in a roundabout way, but I couldn't quite do it. We've got purity culture. We've got all this shame. There was just, he was a doctor, and he kept pointing it out. He's a doctor. He's an upstanding member of the Mennonite community. Yeah. So but anyhow, they figured it out enough to ask me, because Mennonites, they don't talk about sex or rape or things like that. So for them to come to me was just, crazy. It was really crazy that they would do something like that. But the first time they asked me, I did actually say no. And that, was really dumb. But they said the reason I answered no was because they said that they could get me out. But they were offering to attempt to convince Ahaz to let me go stay with another family in another community, because I was unruly and troubled and needed a little help. So they're like, if you say yes, this is how we can help you. And to me, that wasn't help, because I knew that I needed real help. I really needed to get out. I knew that he would never say yes. He would never allow such a thing. And I knew that if they first tried to convince him and that didn't work, if they confront him and say, okay, well, we know about this, Hanna said this, then what happens to me? Because he's gonna talk circles around him. Nobody's gonna believe anyways, and then nothing happens, and then things are worse. And to me, that was gonna be worse, because I would feel more trapped, because I still felt like I had to wait for the right time and the right person to manage to get help.
Right.
But then not too long after, there was a day where I'd been, beat and raped and everything. And I wound up calling each one of them, getting a hold of the phone and talking to them. And I was like, how that you asked me about that. It's true. It's happening. Can you help me? Can you get me out? And they said no. They both told me no, because if it would have been true, I would have said so the first time.
Right.
And, I understand where they're coming from. Like, I get that. But when you're so abused, it's just,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely hear you. And I hope that the people who are listening to this podcast are hearing everything you're saying right now, because the confusion and the control system that existed around you and the entire framework of helplessness that you were literally beaten into believing existed around you, that's what you're speaking to right now. It's a powerlessness.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any of the power in that situation. And then somebody tries to give you a little, and of course your first instinct is, no, I can't trust this. I don't have this. This isn't mine. I don't have the authority or power to speak up, to speak my mind, to say what's on. I don't have that.
Yeah.
And then you go and think about it, process this for a little while, and you go, wait a second, I actually can do this. This is my lifeline. And then they pull it back.
Yeah.
And that just makes it 10 times worse.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, I am so sorry you had to experience that. Wow. So, any consequences then, or you just got the hell out of there and that was that?
From the conversation?
Well, what happened afterwards, I guess, is what I'm wondering, because that happens, and then what fill me in on. So then they kind of pull back, and you don't have that lifeline anymore.
Yeah.
Then how old were you at that moment? And then what happened to eventually you getting the hell out of there at 17 years old?
Okay. Well, I was about 16 at the time. It wasn't too long before I got out. And actually, I had also been being kept deadbolted into my bedroom since I was about 15. And that was, at first, it was only at night. Okay, we're talking about, the increasing abuse again. And, sometimes I'd have to go to the bathroom at midnight. So I'd keep a cup or two in my room in case, I had to go. I'd like pee in a cup, right? Because nobody was going to come let me out. And then it turned into from being locked in to being locked in a little bit more. And it became during the day too. And it was slow, it would only be if I wasn't being, of course, worked at the farm or going to church or, doing housework. So pretty much if I wasn't doing work or if I did still get to take trips with mom to town to the library and whatnot too, and come out to sew and things. So it was, I don't know, it was just gradual. But it got up to the point where I was being locked in all the time.
Wow.
And except for twice a day, I'd be let out once in the morning and once in the evening to go to the bathroom, but it was under guard. My brother, my next younger brother, he was guarding me, or Ahaz would, or even my mom. She actually was a key turner too. And they would let me out and then stand outside the door till I got done and then put me back in the room. And it didn't matter if I screamed or beat on the door, nothing mattered. No one would come let me out. So on one of these times where I was let out, I went and saw a bucket laying just inside my brother's room, which was right, like it was my room, then the bathroom, then the boys' room. So I could just see right into there. And when I came back out, I just kind of darted in and grabbed it real quick and then took it back to my room. And my brother was guarding me that time and he didn't stop me. I'm sure he had no idea what it was for. But so I had that little bucket then to go to the bathroom in. And then when I was let out, I would have to carry my little bucket to and from the bathroom.
Jesus fucking Christ. And this went on for a year?
The being locked in full was less than a year.
Okay.
But from the time I was 15 on, it was first at night, and then it started, the gradual, but then it was maybe 6 months or so where I was locked in all the time. So,
wow. So it went from your home being your prison to literally your room being your prison, just imprisoned by your own father.
And my windows were nailed shut, the bottoms of them at first. And there was a night where I got out because I was trapped in my room, but he didn't know that the tops of my windows slid down. And I discovered it. I figured it out one day and I was so proud of myself. I figured it out and I got out once. It was late at night, maybe like 9:30, 10. So not that late, actually. It was dark. But I took a walk down the road and I was coming back. And as I was coming back, there was actually a police officer who was sitting like a speed trap type deal, sitting, hanging out, waiting to see if people sped. And and I did have opportunities to tell, he asked me what I was doing out so late, where I lived, that kind of thing. I had bruises on my face and my arms. I had a short sleeve dress on, so it ended at like about my elbow. And anyhow, he wound up taking me back to the house. He knew something was wrong and he kept asking me what had happened. And I wouldn't tell him. I told him I fell down some stairs because to me, he wouldn't be able to help because Ahaz was so powerful. I knew what he'd done to my brother, how he had kind of dogged everything and all the court situations that happened. And then, sneaking around, managing to get secret custody of him and sending him to a boys camp. I didn't feel like anybody could stop him. Nobody could help me. I was on my own. And I just had to make it till I was 18 years old. And then I would be able to be free. I could get away from him. I just had to live that long. And he took me back to the house and banged on the door, woke my parents up. And then I walked in front of him into the house, and that's when he saw just how bad the bruising was in the light. And so then they were talking about that. And I went to stand in the hallway by my door, which of course I couldn't get into because at this point now I was locked out of my bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And Ahaz, of course, this officer did not know Ahaz was a doctor. And Ahaz asked him if it was possible for a person to do that to themselves for attention. Of course, as a doctor, it's literally possible to harm yourself. Like, there's no reason why I can't. That was just he was trying to, I feel like, indirectly point it back at me and make me seem crazy.
Yeah.
And the officer said, that yes, of course it was physically possible, but that he didn't believe that that was what had happened to me.
Right.
He said I was either scared of somebody or protecting somebody. And, I just stood there just out of sight in the hallway by my door listening to this. And I could have told him, and I didn't tell him. And part of it is I was so ashamed of not just, the sexual abuse, but even being locked in. And I was locked in because I was unruly for asking all these questions, and because I expressed things like wanting a boyfriend. And at one point I had even made up that I had a secret boyfriend, right? Which is just forbidden. Mennonites, don't date or anything like that. It's just utterly horrifying to them for a girl to say, oh yeah, I've got a boyfriend.
Right.
He didn't exist. I just said it just to anger Ahaz, because I did things like that to try to, in a way, I felt we were in this power struggle, right? Because I was a very strong individual, and I was not going to be submissive, and I was not going to bow down to things that didn't make sense. Like, you give me guidelines that make sense, let's do it. You give me some crazy stuff, and that's just crazy. But anyhow, after that night, he figured out that I had gotten out through the top, and then the tops of my windows were nailed shut as well. So now I was 1,000,000% trapped.
Man. And oh my God.
Yeah, it was.
Because if the officer could only have seen your room, locked, nails in the windows, it could have been all over there. Believe me, I understand missed opportunities.
Yeah.
I took off from Scientology twice, and I went back both times. And early on, and then about halfway through my experience. Mm-hmm. Of 27 fucking years, So so there's no judgment here. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
I get it. It's just, it's so frustrating in hindsight to see what you couldn't see at the time.
Yeah.
You just couldn't see it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, sorry. Man, that is difficult. So it's okay. So it seems fairly predictable what your father's responses were going to be following that incident. Locks up the windows. I'm assuming there was more physical abuse.
Yeah.
How'd you finally get away from this?
So it's actually kind of a long story. So, well, it's not that long. But let me put it this way. I'm going to tell you a story first because it has to do with how I got out.
Please.
So, okay. It was a couple months before I got out. So this was beginning of 2006. And a security system at this point had been installed on the house, a very fancy, expensive one, as I was told many times, to help ensure that I couldn't get out. And that way, if somehow I managed to make a break for the door, because I was trying to run at times. I was trying to run for the doors, and that's why I was being guarded. And so the security system was in case I got past and someone didn't realize. So
this was a direct response to you trying to run away.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, kind of important bit of information there. Yeah. Okay. Good. So you were actively trying to get the hell out of this situation, and he was imprisoning you to stop you from doing that.
Yes.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So I had been let out to use the bathroom, and I did. And when I came out, nobody was guarding me, which was just really weird. And anyhow, I took off for the front door, and of course, as soon as I touched it, this alarm went off, and they had it loud, like it was just screaming loud, so that they would make sure that they heard it. Everybody heard it. And Ahaz and my brother Travis came running after me, and my younger brother, he's a really super, super, super fast runner. I'm not a fast runner. And Ahaz, I think, used to be in track in school or something like that. So even though he's older now, he's still about faster than me. But so they are right on my heels as I'm running out. And I run down the sidewalk across the drive, and my brother manages to get in front of me, blocking off basically me running into the woods, me escaping. Ahaz is right behind me. And at the top of the drive there was a garden, and we always picked rocks out of the garden for years. So there's this pile of rocks sitting there from being picked out of the garden. And I was trapped, and I grabbed these rocks and I start throwing them. And Travis kind of backed off a little bit. I don't think I hit him with a rock. I think I just went near him. And then Ahaz, I was actively just throwing rocks at over and over again. I hit him in the head, I hit him in the shoulder, here and there. And I remember thinking that I wanted for him to die. And I wouldn't say I was actively trying to kill him, because in general, I don't just run around trying to murder people. But definitely, I just wanted everything to stop. I had to be free. I was trying to figure out how to be free. I don't know how really to explain it. So I just kept hitting him with these rocks. Mm-hmm. And he backed off, and he got into the van, which was right there, and closed the door. And I threw a rock through the window, hitting him, because I didn't stop. And so he pulled the cell phone out of his pocket and called 911, saying that I was trying to kill him. And I don't want to say that I was trying to kill him. In my mind, I was just trying to make a situation stop, and I was helpless, mm-hmm. trapped, mm-hmm. caged, wild animal. I mean, I was essentially caged, seriously abused. So the police actually came out, and they didn't go inside. They didn't, see my room, anything like that. And I didn't tell them anything. And, it was just pretty much said that, I was unruly, that I was bipolar. They thought I might be manic depressive, that, they didn't understand why this girl was acting out in this happy, loving family with a doctor and the Holderman Mennonites and all this, that, and the other. And so there wound up being a court date, though, because Ahaz decided to press charges against me to get me put on house arrest. And he told me that once he had me put on house arrest, that if I tried to leave, the police would bring me back every single time. And if I did try to run, every time I tried to run, then my time would be extended. He told me that my time could be extended long past I was 18 for years, that I was going to be trapped there. And yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. So that's a fun story. So what happened next?
Okay. So the court date came and went, and there was another one rescheduled in April of 2006, and to determine what was actually going to happen, because I has told the judge the same thing. He wanted me put under house arrest and to, be kept there. It's just crazy. I'm already deadbolted in. Someone did ask me questions.
Did you have your own lawyer?
No.
Nobody was representing you?
No.
Okay.
I think it might have been a hearing for it, because then there was another date scheduled. Uh-huh. But Mom and Ahaz went there with me. And then someone did come up to me and ask me questions about if I was being hurt, if I was safe at home. But they didn't take me away from Mom and Ahaz. We were all just right there. And, I wanted to tell them, but, if I tell them, they're never going to believe me. He's a doctor. He's Mennonite. He's also sitting right there beside me.
Right.
I thought about asking, can we talk privately? But, I didn't. Anyways, so this court date is scheduled for like April at this point, and we go back. There came a day that in April that I was let out to use the bathroom and a shower by my mom. And when I came out, she wasn't there. And so I kind of wandered down the hallway and spied the business cell phone, which cell phones were only allowed for business at the time. And it was laying on her side table by her recliner. So I grabbed it and I stuck it down the front of my dress, which of course, again, I had that. I had that handy elastic around my waist. So to kind of like hang on to the phone, and I was hoping it wasn't going to like slide past the elastic because it was a phone, it was a little heavy. My mom walks around the corner of the kitchen just as I do that. And she didn't, say anything about me being in the living room. She just took me back to my room, deadbolted me in. And I was really scared that someone was going to come in there and realize that the phone was missing and come after me. But nobody did. And so I just waited for hours. And about 1 a.m. On April 6th of 2006, I called a hotline that was in the back of a Chicken Soup for the Soul book that my mom had given me. And I didn't think that I could call 911 because it's not an emergency, right? I'm not technically in danger. I'm in a room, safe in a house.
Right.
The Mennonites told me over and over again, I wasn't being, whipped excessively, that it was all just discipline. As he told me, it was all just discipline. And, everybody around me had. So anyways, I called, and the being locked up too, and Mennonites had also said that was just to keep me safe. And so that was allowed. Because they also knew I was being locked up. But
wait a minute, they knew you were being locked up?
Yes.
Other people in the community knew you were being deadbolted in your room for hours at a day or for all day long, and they did nothing.
Well, they knew. They at least knew I was being locked in at night, because that was the story I has told everybody. And yeah,
he literally went around telling everybody in the community he was imprisoning his own daughter in her room at night.
Well, I know he talked to someone named Maximus in the book, who was also a school board member, I had told.
Yep.
I know it was talked to with the elderly minister, Grandpa, and a few others as well.
Unbelievable.
So I can't 1,000,000% say that every single person within the community
No, of course. But the leadership. Yeah. No, I get it.
But people, they were aware, the important ones. My friend Joyce, her family, they knew. There was different people that I talked to over time, and I told them. But to them, it wasn't a problem, right? Because they were just making sure I was being kept safe.
Tell me again how religion doesn't corrupt everything.
I know. It's awful.
I mean, you don't want to paint these people with too broad a brush, but at the same time, like, fuck these people. Like, what the hell are we talking about? This is a bunch of religious fanatics who are completely okay with their kids being abused, ritually abused for years, and they're totally okay with it. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
I mean, how am I supposed to not have nothing but dripping contempt for these people?
Right.
How? Tell me, explain to me how it is I'm supposed to respect their godliness when they are some of the worst human beings you could possibly imagine. It's mind-boggling. Anyway, I'm sorry. I just keep reacting to what you're saying, but it's just so horrifying.
Yeah. All right. So I had this phone. I was in my room, and I called this hotline.
Yep.
And everyone was asleep. The house was quiet. I was still scared that someone was going to hear me talking on this phone.
I'll bet.
But I called and I told them that I was going to kill myself. And which I actually was, because in my mind, I couldn't stay alive and endure the torture any longer until I was 18. I only had about 8 months left, but I couldn't do it.
Yep.
It was so horrible. And there were way too many days left. And and plus he had by this time also told me that he wasn't going to let me leave until I was 25. And he actually contradicted himself when he said this, because I know I mentioned back at 13, he told me he knew I was a woman. So now he started telling me that I wouldn't be a woman until I was 25 years old.
Right.
And so he was just going to keep me. And then with the whole house arrest thing, I'm like, I'm literally never going to get out. So even though I had hope that I could somehow get out and escape at 18, or legally, I knew that I had the right to leave. I didn't think that I would be able to get out and actually physically walk away.
Right.
Because he wouldn't let me. So told this hotline I was going to kill myself. And they contacted 911. And they sent out 3 officers and an ambulance who, they came banging on the door. And sorry. It was the middle of the night, and I could hear my parents yelling, and the police were yelling back at them, and they wanted to know where my room was. And so, they were pointed the right direction. I could hear them coming. I heard them as soon as they touched the doorknob and tried to open it, and realized it was dead bolted shut. And so then they started screaming, "Where's the key? Where's the key?" And Aha's got the key for them. And, he's yelling, they're yelling. They get the door open and come in. And I was scared to death. I'm like, they're not going to take me. They're just going to leave me here. Or it's going to be worse than it was. And I didn't know even what worse looked like, honestly. But, I had to get out somehow.
Yep.
And the police wound up taking me to the hospital. I didn't ride in the ambulance. And there, Ahaz was yelling. Well, plus when they were trying to take me from the house, he was yelling, he's a doctor. He can take care of any medical needs I have, yada, yada, yada. So they couldn't take me, but they took me anyways.
Good.
At the hospital, he was screaming, and I could hear him. And they had me in this little room, like one with the actual real door, not like the little curtain partitioned off rooms.
Yep.
And he was screaming that, he was going to take me, that I was his daughter, that, again, he's a doctor, screaming more about that. He was escorted from the premises. And they brought my mom in to see me because they assumed that I would want to see my mom. But my mom was standing there acting like, she didn't know what was wrong. And, what happened to my poor little Hanny Annie? What can I do for my Hanny Annie? And I wouldn't talk to her because I'm like, what do you mean what's wrong? Like, you literally even helped turn the key. Like, I pee in a bucket. And, there's all these horrible things happening. Nobody will stop it. Here all these years, she's listened to my screams. My entire family has, even my siblings. My siblings would laugh and mock, and were encouraged to do so while I was being beat.
Right.
And she just acted like nothing, like she didn't know what could be wrong with her poor little girl. And they did have someone from Children's Services come in and talk to me, and I couldn't, I just, I was still so scared. I really couldn't tell them everything. It's not like I got out and went, okay, this is the list of what is happening, y'all. I didn't do that at all. When he asked if I was being sexually abused, I did manage to nod my head yes, but I couldn't tell him, anything else, nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Didn't say who, nothing. And so they wound up admitting me to a mental hospital for teens. And it was actually, I know it sounds so weird, but it was amazing because they gave me a set of scrubs to wear and I got to wear pants.
Yep.
And I was technically free, even though I was now locked up inside of another building. I wasn't being hurt actively. Right. I was technically safe. I was in a safe place. And so I was so happy to be there. And it took me a couple weeks to talk. Yeah, but then I finally told them about the sexual assault. I told them that he had hit and kicked me and beat me. But I told them because I didn't think that I could call the beating that was happening for years actually beating. So I didn't talk about that. I thought beating only meant if you physically punch someone. That's what I thought the definition meant. I was only telling them about the very, very recent, like within the past few months, where he had started hitting and kicking me.
Yep.
And so, that didn't give them nearly as much to go on. And the thing is, the police never filed a police report. They never took pictures of the room.
What?
So, yeah.
They never filed a police report finding you imprisoned in your own home with a deadbolt and the windows locked?
It doesn't exist. The report does not exist.
For fuck's sake.
I kid you not. There was no report. 3 officers and nobody wrote the report.
And an ambulance. My God.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not like you weren't justified in not trusting the system. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like, my God, you think every time, you're just about there. You're just about, in safe hands. And no, they let you down. But you finally got at least away enough to get into a hospital and talk to some people and start opening up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the psychiatrist there, I did tell him, I was being locked up, but I also only told him it was at night because I knew that if I told them I was only being let out once in the morning and once in the evening, long enough to use the bathroom, that they would want to know how I was using the bathroom the rest of the time. And I was so ashamed and so embarrassed about that bucket. I couldn't tell anybody. And that is the reason I didn't tell them. And again, I had no idea that a police report hadn't been written until actually 2020 is when I found out, because I kind of investigated what had went wrong and how it all had went wrong. But so I finally started talking. The Department of Children's Services came in and they took me to a foster home. They removed my younger siblings. Sarah was already 18 at the time, so they never actually talked to her. And my brothers, they asked the one that had been guarding me, what if he thought the sexual assault was true because of his age. He was like 14. And he said, no, he didn't believe anything like that was true, that I was always trying to cause trouble. And then the younger boy, they asked him, Dennis, they asked what my relationship was between me and Ahaz. And he said that I didn't like to be around him and he didn't know why. Dennis didn't know why I didn't want to be around Ahaz. And then the youngest boy, he was quite small, so they didn't ask him anything. But even the littlest one had seen me being beat. So I don't know, any of them could have told. And the thing is, they didn't know, my siblings didn't know that I needed help. They truly thought that I was being locked up for my own good.
Right.
That I needed to fall in line and be submissive.
Right.
So they never told because they didn't know it was bad.
No, of course not. I mean, when the authority figure is the one who's making all the rules in the house and saying what's right and wrong, good or bad, and the community supports that person.
Yeah.
and continually, continual litanies to every child about how wonderful their father is, how great their father is. Isn't it so lucky that they have their father?
Mm-hmm.
And their father's a monster.
Yeah.
But they can't, they have no way to contextualize that. No TV, no books, no radio, no comparatives to Hitler, no comparatives to Mussolini, no comparatives to history of any kind, no popular entertainment memes, there's no exposure to any of that. So you've got nothing to build on. This is your normal.
Yeah.
It's just a monster factory.
Yeah.
Wow.
So I got put in foster care. A few days later, my brothers were sent back because since they didn't disclose anything, then they, decided there was no danger to them, and they kept me in. What actually wound up saving me, though, was the stoning event. And it's crazy because there wasn't enough evidence because rape couldn't be proven. My siblings said that no, I hadn't been beat or whatever, or all this. So, yeah. Sorry. It was, sorry, I'm just leaving a long silence.
You take your time. I know you have a lot of thoughts to gather right now, and it's completely okay with me that you take your time and get them gathered up. Okay.
With the court stuff, there wasn't enough evidence of anything. The judge, you have to have evidence to prove something.
Right.
And, my mom even was saying it wasn't true. And everybody was just saying it wasn't true. So the judge used the stoning thing to declare me a delinquent and in need of staying in foster care for rehabilitation. And he made it clear, which I didn't really understand it till after because I was kind of freaking out when he declared me a delinquent. And I was like, what does this mean? Like, am I in trouble? Am I going to juvie? But I'm at it now.
No, of course. Yeah.
I have no idea. But he made it clear that did not mean that he didn't believe me. And of course, later after the session, he actually pulled my case manager with Department of Children's Services back to his chambers. And when she came back out, she explained that, he definitely believed me, but this was the only way he could save me. This was the only thing he could do to make sure I wasn't going back. And she said there wasn't going to be any kind of, unruly rehabilitation thing. No, I wasn't going to juvie. I was going to stay in foster care with my foster family, and they were going to help me learn and prepare to move forward and for when I was going to turn 18, because I was really close,
right.
At this point.
Right.
And so another funny thing is part of the whole court situation, Ahaz and the attorney kept saying that, I needed to be brought back. I was unruly, to be under the care of my loving family. So, I could get better kind of thing, which their idea of better is not pleasant. So.
No, their idea of better is a submissive slave.
Yeah.
Right.
So, anyways, wow. As soon as that court thing was over, then Ahaz and his attorney came back and contested the judge's decision. And after having to go through all this and saying, she's so unruly, and even for years before saying that I'm unruly because I question things and I have to know things and I want to learn and I want education and I want freedom. And heck, I want to wear lipstick. Oh my gosh. After all this time, he said that the judge was wrong and I was not unruly and I needed to come home because since I wasn't unruly, I did not need to remain in foster care for rehabilitation. Mm-hmm. Yep. And the thing is, though, they requested to talk to my counselor. I'd been assigned a counselor in foster care. I really wasn't talking to her very much because I couldn't tell her the past, but I could tell her current things like feeling anxious about just being out here in the world. Because even though I wanted to be out here, I mean, it's a whole different world. It's different. Everything I'd been taught that was taboo, even though I didn't personally believe it was taboo, still just coming out and doing them just is crazy. So I would talk to her about little tiny things like that, not anything about the abuse. But they had requested to have her testimony at this appeal. Well, she wasn't able to attend, and she sent a signed affidavit instead. By law, to my knowledge, the judge could have accepted it and moved on. But instead, he decided that he was going to need to have her testimony in person. And so the hearing was rescheduled for January of 2007. And I turned 18 in December of 2006. So it was after my birthday. So thanks to first him figuring out how to keep me in there using the stoning situation. And then secondly, because my counselor's sitting in the appeal and he's an awesome judge, he saved me.
Wow.
I mean, because nothing good. There was no police report. I had no idea that there wasn't. I wasn't talking to anybody about having been deadbolted in because it was so shameful. And I assumed that Department of Children's Services knew I had been locked into that room. And so I never questioned why. Well, I did question a little bit why they weren't bringing it up in court. It wasn't part of anything. But I don't know. They never brought it up. And in a way, I felt like them not talking about it meant that it must have been okay. It must have actually been okay. Not just to Ahaz and to the Mennonites, but to them too.
Right. Well, I could completely see why you would think that, why your mind would go in that direction. I mean, you've been betrayed at every turn. And, we can see now that this judge was working in your favor and there were efforts being made to try to tell you that. But it's clear, enough, I'm sure, that that's a situation at the time. And these years of experience that you'd had were so tumultuous with no idea of where you were going or what direction this was going in that, it's very hard to contextualize the situation when you're in the middle of it like that.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that, questions like that would be very confusing and very difficult to deal with, like, I'm just going to assume they know.
Right.
And then you find out later, no, nobody knows shit, and you're like, what? How's that even possible? Right? No police report. Mm-hmm. Wow. Yep. Wow. It's, I'm sitting here thankful that somebody saw through the bullshit, in a position of authority and was able to maneuver enough, and I really, really hope that everybody is really paying attention to what you're saying in terms of why you weren't saying everything then.
Yeah.
Because it's kind of understandable. But you have to get the context of it to make it make sense. Because most people are going to be judgy as hell and go, well, why didn't you just say everything right then and there? What's your problem? How could you? But when you understand that there is no such thing as a safe person for you to talk to.
Yeah. Everyone I tried to tell told me I wasn't being abused. Right. I was being disciplined and being locked up, being whipped. Even though I expressed it was for hours at a time, which should have triggered them in. I don't know. Of course, they have 8th grade educations,
Yeah, you're not wrong. There's so much enabling going on here, right? And I don't want to overuse this word, but it kind of fits in this context. You've got an entire community of people who allow and apologize for and defend child abuse, blatant child abuse, to the point where these children are literally killing each other because of this abusive nonsense that's going on, and an entire community of people who turn a blind eye and are completely okay with it because it's just discipline.
Mm-hmm.
That's some pretty strong shit right there, to be levered against a 16-year-old, 17-year-old girl, who hasn't known anything else literally your entire life. So, yeah, I think it's a little understandable why the situation developed the way that it did and why you acted the way that you did.
Yeah.
Just want to say, I mean, I don't know if anybody's really said that out loud, super clear. Probably at this point, you've had a number of people tell you that, but I certainly want to add to that to counter all those years of bullshit,
Yeah. Well,
damn.
I think it's explained in my book really well. I tried to make sure it was really clear throughout the space of the chapters and the years that, how it all kind of wind up accumulating into this thing where, there's no point in even telling anybody because they're not going to believe me.
Right.
For one thing. And it was,
yeah.
It was just a mess.
See, everything you're describing, and you're describing, you're giving a testimonial here. You're giving, this is my life experience. This is what happened to me according to my interpretation and understanding of my life. Whether all the things you're saying are objectively true or not, I can't know.
Right.
What I can know is the education that I have and all the markers and check boxes that I have that tell me about cults and abusive domestic situations. You have literally checked off every box of what matches up with my education, which is why I believe your story is credible.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, it's not just another story. It's, but when I describe it that way, I don't mean to make it just another story. But I'm trying to make it clear that, okay, yeah, we don't have video, we don't have film, we don't have photography, we don't, I have your word.
Yes.
I believe you because all the things you say are consistent with all the things I know happen in authoritarian, destructive domestic violence situations. I mean, it's same stuff. I've been saying this for years. My education now confirms it. I mean, all of the abusers and enablers, they're of this mindset, whether they're in Scientology, whether they're in the Mennonites, whether they're some psychotic father. It's all the same mix. It's the same kind of nuttiness and control that goes on.
Yeah.
And so I believe your story is credible, for those reasons. So, wow. So you finally got out through the foster system.
Yes. Yep. Then I turned 18.
Now, of course, what's the epilogue here, right? So you get out. Now it's been years and you've, made some Facebook posts. Now you've written a book, right? Now you're on a podcast, talking about this. Where do you want to go with this? And what are your goals here? What are your intentions in doing this?
Well, of course, the original goal is just to tell my story because of, not such a good reason, which isn't the reason anymore.
Right.
Now I need to tell my story, to also encourage other people to come forward. And whether it be Holderman Mennonites or people that have been abused in other cults or even not in cults, just anybody to tell their story. There is also another thing I forgot to mention that is really, really important. I want to bring attention to with the Holderman Mennonites specifically. They have something called the Holy Kiss. And at the time, it was really weird. It was really gross to me, I felt like. But I I never told Department of Children's Services this as well because I had no idea that maybe I should. So among the Mennonites, all the members have to kiss each other basically to greet. This is done at church. This is done when they go to each other's houses, which is very frequent. It's a little different out here. I feel like definitely Holderman Mennonites go visit each other way more than out here in the world happens.
Well, without any TV, radio, movies, or DVDs, I don't know there's a whole lot else to do,
Yeah, you go visit people.
Pretty much.
Yeah. But, and it could even be with strangers from neighboring congregations, because there's a lot of congregations. There's well over 100 in the United States alone, as well as Canada, Mexico. Anyways, so the Holy Kiss is where the members all have to exchange this kiss. It's straight on the lips. It's female to female and male to male, so no intermixing. But even the minors are having to participate in this. So myself personally, and I even said it on the back cover of my book, I have kissed approximately about 200-ish people as a minor while living there amongst the Holderman Mennonites. Some of those people were complete strangers. And although some people may say, okay, well, that's not so bad. It's, like females kissing females and, guys kissing the guys. But this, to me, is definitely a form of sexual abuse as well. And I think about all the pedophiles that are living in there. You got to think about what they're feeling. They're able to kiss these little boys. If a 9-year-old joins, that means they're now kissing all these people. And again, wow. Even complete strangers, whether your family is traveling to another congregation or other family travels to yours, they do travel very frequently amongst each other. Lots and lots of traveling. It's a big thing.
Wow.
And so, yeah, I've kissed a lot of people, and this is a practice that still goes on. And I know that things kind of changed because of the whole COVID situation as far as right now today goes. But for the ones that have started it again or are intending to, they have every intention of every single member being part of that, whether they've released that they're starting it again or not. But when they do, it's a thing. And yeah, so I really want to bring attention to that because I think it's terrible, but that's just me. I have looked into other Mennonites and different cultures, and there are not very many that practice it anymore. And from the ones that I have found that do, and that from even other Mennonites, different types of Mennonites, there's many different types, of course, that I've heard stories of, it'll only be the elders, like the minister or the deacon, that do the holy kiss. That's it. It's nobody else. Okay. Or that they've heard stories about it having been done, but it stopped, generations ago. And I'm sure there's probably some other one out there that does it too, but I don't know for sure. I haven't personally found one. But even on information on the web, you can find on the Holderman Mennonites, they talk about the holy kiss or the kiss of peace. But what they don't say is that it is all ages. So a 9-year-old boy can be kissing a 15-year-old, a 25-year-old, a 90-year-old man. And the same with females.
Wow.
So, yeah, to me, it's wrong. It's very, very wrong.
It's weird. It's very weird. The stuff these guys get up to,
I know.
I was just looking here quickly over the courtship ceremony or services or whatever, how they work that. There is no courtship.
Yeah.
The guy goes to the minister and goes, yeah, I want to marry her. And then the minister goes over and goes, hey, what do you think? You want to marry Joe? Oh yeah. Okay. Boom. Done deal. Like, really? Is that really how it goes?
That's the short version.
Yeah.
Technically, the longer version is that when he sees a girl, of course, I mentioned the traveling. They travel frequently. So, and this is, they generally tend to marry people from outside their congregation. It has to still be within the Holderman Mennonites, period. Like, you can't marry an outsider at all.
Okay.
But they'll marry them, and then one of them will move to the other congregation. Traditionally, the female will move to the male's congregation. But when he sees a female that he wants, and he may or may not have talked to her before, I know situations where some of them just don't even really know, the person that they're marrying.
Right.
And have only maybe had a conversation or two, or maybe they were seen somewhere, but they don't remember seeing the other person. Just weird stuff. But so the guy is supposed to pray on it for a couple of weeks. And if God comes back to him and tells him, yes, that this is the woman, he goes to the minister. And then the ministers are at his congregation are supposed to pray on it for a couple of weeks. And if they feel like God is saying, yes, these two should be together, they go to the ministers at the girls' congregation and talk to them. And then they pray on it for a couple of weeks. Traditionally, then it'll go to the girl's parents and they pray on it for a couple of weeks. Once everybody has already decided this girl's future, it is then taken to the girl. The ministers from her congregation, not him, not his ministers, take it to the girl and say, so and so from such and such congregation is sending you a proposal. And then they are supposed to take a couple of weeks to pray on it. But the thing is that when you say no, and this is how it was when I was there, I heard a rumor that girls have slightly more say now. I can't it was like a hearsay type thing. I'm not 100% positive, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah.
The girls can't say no, because by the time God has approved it through all these people, if she goes against it, she's going against what God wants. And she won't be able to marry if she turns it down. She can't marry somebody else. Also, another thing, the females had to be married by their 20th birthday. Again, I heard from a rumor source that I'm not 100% sure about, said that the age is going a little bit further these days, maybe like 22, 23 instead of 20. But that was the cutoff. My sister called me on her 20th birthday crying because she was 20 years old and she was now an old maid.
Right.
And as far as coming out here, I know it's a little bit change of subject, but coming out here, I had no idea how late people would get married. It just blew my mind. And it just seemed crazy. Doesn't everybody marry that young? And another thing is, I heard out here of engagements happening that last like a year or 2 years or 5 years. And people are planning these weddings like way down the road. And it didn't even make sense to me. With the Holderman Mennonites, your engagement is 3 months long. You can't have 2 month long engagement. You can't have a 4 month long engagement. It is 3 months long, period. And then you're married.
Right.
So, yeah.
I imagined that, and I'm glad you verified for me that the girls didn't really have much of a choice. Again, through context of the indoctrination and the culture. If you got really big, wide questions about this, start thinking about how much you can push back against certain cultural values here, anywhere, wherever you are. Well, it's some really important thing. Try pushing back against it and watch what happens. Right? Watch what happens to you socially. If not physically and emotionally. So, So this is definitely, I definitely have no problem believing that, especially given the fact that women are given such short shrift and are basically treated as property in these communities.
Yeah.
So of course the woman's the last one to know and the last one to be consulted and the last opinion anybody cares about.
Yeah. I mean, it's just wild. It's unlike anything that happens out here, in the worldly world.
That's right. Well, here's why, is because the world has moved on.
Yeah.
Right? The world has moved on. The world in general recognizes that's barbaric Stone Age bullshit, right? That has nothing to do with human rights, has nothing to do with modern Enlightenment thinking, right? This is all counter-Enlightenment, counter-culture, we're going to sequester ourselves away and continue to live in the Stone Age in our little caves and our little communities because this is the way we all know God thinks it should be. Mm-hmm. And it's just illusion, and unfortunately it has the, perhaps unintended consequences of the kind of abuse that your life, that you experienced in your life. But I don't know that it's so unintended. One tends to wonder after a little while when there's so much of this going on and so many of us pushing back against it, and these people just are relentless. They just won't ever come to the present and come out of the Stone Age,
Mm-hmm.
And that's where their heads are very firmly in, if not fully up their asses. It's another way some people might think about this. So
there you go.
Yeah. So, I you try to be nice. You try to be tolerant. You want to let people believe what they want to believe. But when it results in stuff like this, you just go, no, fuck that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which these people also, the huge majority of them, of course, there's very few people coming in, but they've been raised like this, which means they've been led to believe these things since birth.
That's right.
And the outside world is so taboo. It is so wrong. It is so bad. It's just, it's
right.
wild. It makes you feel like if you go and do a certain thing that you're definitely going to hell. And it's kind of like every single day you're living for the day that you die. Like you're not living just to live. You're living for dying.
Right.
And that's just, it's not a way to live. It's really sad. And so for people that are brought up like that, and it's how every single day of their life is, it's incredibly difficult for them to get out. And then plus there's the being shunned as well, because when you leave, things definitely change. You're no longer Holderman Mennonite, and your family and friends are supposed to limit their interactions with you immensely. When they have a conversation with you, the conversations that they're supposed to have are supposed to be more on religion and coming back than talking about other things. And they try to cut everything off so that people want to come back, so that they will be lonely, so that they will realize that they're all abandoned in this big, huge world, and they have no idea what to do because they haven't been raised to know what to do out here. It's a different culture. It's like if you move to Japan and you have a whole new culture to learn, even though you've heard about Japan, you've read about Japan, you've seen pictures, you've seen videos, you've done whatever, maybe you even talked to people from Japan. It's different. And it's very, very difficult. And it's why a lot that leave go back.
Right.
Because you're alone. And it's just very, very difficult.
You said it. You said it. These bubble worlds, man, they are wild. I so hear you. So walk that path, so understand. It really is. In fact, I was just about to say before you did, brilliant analogy, because it is like moving to another country. That is exactly what it's like. Mm-hmm. You are in a whole different culture. Mm-hmm. And that's the best way to explain it, is everybody thinks things that are very, very different from how you think. Yeah. And you got to acclimate to this, because this is normal.
Right.
And what you were involved in, you come to learn, was the abnormal. What you were doing was the Twilight Zone, was the weird, crazy. And the normal's actually kind of got its own crazy, but it's nothing like this bullshit you came from.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's like growing up. It's like that Kimmy Schmidt thing, like growing up in a right. It's like growing up in a bomb shelter, and then you come and you're like, what the hell, Huh? You've had a couple interactions with the outside world when the door had to open, but otherwise you don't trust it, you don't know it, you cannot have any faith in it.
Yeah.
And then the world, as you've described, the world you came from was such an ordeal, was such just a hell on earth, that you would do anything to get out of it.
Yeah.
And yet you think that this outside world that is really your salvation is even worse. You've been indoctrinated to believe it's even worse. And so it's just this mind trap of it beats all other mind traps. It's unbelievable.
Yeah. When I got out, I got like blonde highlights put in my hair, and I got my ears pierced and got necklaces, and I was wearing pants and all these cool t-shirts. And I felt so bad and so good at the same time. I was like, I might be going to hell for this, but I love these earrings, and oh my God, let me just put on my lip gloss here. Like, I'm probably going to burn, but it'll, like everybody else is doing, it'll be okay. It'll be okay.
That's right.
It's worth burning for, I think. I'm not really sure.
Well, I'll tell you one thing about burning is, whether that's true or not, and I don't think there's an ounce of truth to it.
Yeah.
Would you really want to spend your life in heaven with those people?
No.
Right?
No, absolutely not. No, that is not my idea of heaven. No.
No, I'd rather go down to hell where all the fun people are.
Thank you.
Right?
See, it's worth burning.
Basically. you know, basically. Yeah. And of course, like I said, it's all a fantasy anyway. I have I have zero fear that I'm going to die and wake up and be judged for my sins. You know, I mean, give me a break. All right. Well,
I keep interrupting you.
I keep interrupting you. What were you going to say?
I was going to point out, you know, at the time at like 17, 18 and everything, where I just came from that's still, you know, what I was thinking, balancing on, you know, is there heaven? Is there hell? Am I burning? Am I not burning for this kind of thing? Now I'm agnostic, you know, just
exactly
middle of the road. I'm just not even going to mess with it.
Nope. Who cares? Yep. Who knows? Who cares? One thing I know for sure is that anybody who thinks God gives a rat's ass about them after looking at the size and scope of this universe and the infinite forms of life that must exist throughout it, and this little pipsqueak planet in this little pipsqueak arm of a little pipsqueak galaxy in the middle of nowhere. Yeah. And we're the chosen people. I mean, come on. You know, give me a break.
Well, also, here's the thing. I've thought before that, you know, if there really was a God, right? And instead of trying to fix things after bad things happen, how about he just don't let the bad people be born? Because if he knows and sees all, he would know that those cute little innocent babies or embryos or whatever are going to grow up and be horrible people like Ahaz. What kind of God would deliberately let someone be born like that? How about you just don't let that happen? And then we don't have to go through all this. But, you know, do you really, for those, you know, that follow all that, how does someone really want to follow a God that just lets people, like just horrible people, be born to go on and abuse innocent people?
Exactly.
I don't know, but anyhow.
Well, it's interesting to me how, just since we're God bashing right now, and I do think this is particularly clever, so I will say, I find it fascinating that God is most often a reflection of a person's ego. It's almost a mirror image of the person's ego than it is a reflection of a divine creator who could have possibly created all of this out of nothing, right? And then be so petty and jealous and sick and disgusting as to care which statue I worship or whether I jerk off or not. Like, are you really serious right now? You know what I mean? Like, this is your ego talking, dude. This isn't God. This is 1000% your fucking ego. You know, you just go look in a mirror. That's your God.
Yeah. I do have a really fun fact since you said that one thing. So among the Holderman Mennonites, of course, they have their whole purity culture thing, and you're not supposed to like masturbate. And so if you masturbate, you're encouraged you need to confess it in front of, you know, the ministers, the congregation, all the members.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you need to confess it, which is crazy. I know people that have done it and they confess specifically. And I'm like, man, why are you sorry for that? I don't know. Okay, but hey.
No, I tell you, man. There has never been a control mechanism invented that beats the control mechanism of sex. Mm-hmm. There is just no way to control people better than to shame them for a perfectly natural biological impulse. In fact, not even impulse. That's actually the wrong word. Yes, it's impulsive, but it's actually a biological imperative. Mm-hmm. You know, your entire body is tuned to do two things: eat and have sex. Yeah. You know? And those are the only two imperatives that you've got, and sleeping, I suppose. And that's it. Everything else is up for grabs, you know. But to shame people for that, to make them guilty, what are you doing? You know, what are you doing? You're controlling people. That's all you're doing. Yep. You know. Anyway, like I said, I get a little cynical about some of this stuff sometimes. I still can say all of this and not feel hypocritical because I am totally fine with people believing whatever they want. I really don't care. I really don't, you know. It doesn't seem you do either.
Well, they can believe whatever they want as long as they are not hurting people. Like, by the time you start hurting people and abusing people, that's a really big problem.
Exactly.
You know? But if you're pushing it out on others, but personal beliefs, It's whatever.
Yeah, whatever. I don't care.
Free world. We live in America.
Exactly.
Okay, for a reason. There's freedom of all kinds of things. Of course, as a kid, I had no freedom of religion, even though I lived in the country with freedom of religion. I didn't have that right. I didn't have freedom of education. Nothing. Just because I was a female and a kid.
Exactly.
Kids don't have rights. It's like you said towards the beginning. They're their own people.
That's right.
They have the right to make informed decisions.
Well, and that's the thing is that, because there's obviously going to be an awful lot of people who listen to this or think along the lines of, well, yeah, but kids don't have any judgment or kids can't make up their own minds or all that. Well, yeah, fine, to a certain degree. I mean, you've definitely got to develop critical thinking skills, and 10-year-olds don't have that the same way 12-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 25-year-olds. You grow into it.
Yeah.
But to just assume that until you're 18, you have nothing to say of any value, that you have nothing to contribute, that everything you think is, oh, isn't that cute? Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
These are little human beings you're raising. These aren't your dolls. They're not your personal possessions. And people who have that attitude shouldn't be parents.
No.
It's really, I mean, if you really wanted to draw a line in the sand as to what's going to be a good parent and what's not. One, did they want the kids in the first place? That's vital. And two, just because they wanted them doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be a good parent. Can they treat these people as human beings, as people first, and their children second? Mm-hmm. And if you had that, you'd get rid of an awful lot of child abuse real fast.
Yeah.
But we got a long way to go before we get humans up to that, that level. So we have to keep exposing and talking about this crap and talk about, what happens. And my point about first to second gen religion stands. I mean, fine, go be a true believer, but don't abuse your kids because of that.
Yeah.
It's not right. Okay. So you've written a book. Where do we find that book?
On Amazon. You can purchase it in paperback or on Kindle. It is called Beat. And then the subtitle is My Journey Through Abuse and the Holderman Mennonites. And it's by Hanna, me.
Beautiful. And I will have a link to that in the show notes here on my podcast site and in the YouTube description. So you guys can get that book. And I highly encourage you to do so. It's a tumultuous read, little trigger warning. It's not fun, but it's information that I think we need to have and that we should be aware of and that we should eventually do something about so that we don't have to have more people grow up like that,
There's way too many being abused. So many.
Yeah. What is there anything else you'd like to say in regards to your father, relationship with, of anything else about that, or your mom, or your current situation with that?
I mean, I haven't talked to him, it has since all that. My mom, I still do stay in contact with her a lot. Even though she was the one that turned the key sometimes, and I bonded to her throughout my childhood, and I'm still bonded to her, even though some people will probably find that really strange. I'm not always sure how to feel about it sometimes, but it's just a thing. My siblings, I don't really have much to do with. My sister, Sarah, I talk to sometimes, but I don't talk to the one that wound up guarding me or anything like that, Travis. Okay. Yeah, really, I just don't really talk to him.
I get it. Totally get it. I was just curious. Again, no judgment here. Families got to sort out their stuff however they sort it out or not. It's really incumbent on the individuals how they want to go about living their life. So zero judgment from me here. I was just curious how it was going.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I hope that you have the opportunity to tell your story more frequently on other platforms as well, that this is the beginning of something for you. We're getting the word out about this stuff, because I do believe in my heart of hearts, and because of the experience I've had in telling my own story and others, that it does help.
Yeah.
It helps a lot. And it'll help in ways that you might not ever even become aware of. So know that. because I have had to learn that lesson myself over many years. There have been times I've been putting stuff out, and thought for sure nobody cared and nobody was listening, and it didn't matter. And a year later, I get an email from somebody, you completely changed my life. I totally turned everything around because I learned I was in an abusive situation and I didn't have to be, because of your experience and you sharing it. And I am positive you and your experience will do the same thing with people. So please do continue getting the word out.
Okay.
Yeah. Just want to say that. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before we wrapped up?
I don't think so.
Okay. Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for your time and your candor and, really your guts. I mean, it's not everybody who can do this.
Yeah. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to, like, a few months back, just thinking about the possibility of something might even be a thing, like podcasts or talk shows. But it's, through the healing process and everything, I've got to the point where I can verbally talk about it. And it's pretty amazing, because even a year ago, I never could have had this conversation ever. Right. Not even like 2 sentences worth of it. It just would not have happened at all. Just couldn't have done it. So, yeah.
Well, very well done to you. And I'm very, very happy. And even in a little way, without this sounding at all condescending, I am very proud of you for stepping up and stepping out and speaking up, because I know how much guts that takes, and how, you put yourself out there and you don't know what's coming back.
Right.
It can be hard. So well done to you. All right. So folks out there, check out her book. And of course, if you're enjoying the podcast, if the podcast I'm putting out here is at all informative, I'm not going to necessarily call this one entertaining, but I certainly informative and educational. And I hope that is getting across. And I hope that telling your story today has helped some people out there. So if you are, of course, if the channel is something that's worthwhile to you and you think it's worth supporting, then join me on Patreon. Link is also below in the description section. All right, folks, I will see you next week. Bye-bye.